Built from ancient black stone and red earth, its walls stood high above the jungle canopy, watching over a kingdom where sacred rivers cut through thick green forests, where mist curled around the mountains at dawn, and where the cries of unseen creatures echoed long after sunset. Beyond the palace gates, the land stretched into wild beauty. Palm groves bent under humid winds. Baobab trees stood like old spirits, with their arms raised to the sky. During the rainy season, the earth smelled of wet leaves, river mud, and flowering vines. During the dry months, harmattan dust drifted from the north and coated the palace stones in a pale, ghostly veil. This was a kingdom of wolves, but not the kind that hid from men. Here, wolves ruled as clans, as warriors, as bloodlines blessed by the moon and feared by their enemies. Every child born with wolf blood waited for the night of first shifting, when drums would sound at the sacred moon rock and elders would paint their skin with white ash. To shift was to belong. To shift was to be named before the ancestors. To shift was to become useful. Zuri had never shifted. That single truth had followed her like a curse. In the Alpha King's palace, where rank decided the weight of a person's voice, Zuri existed at the bottom of every gaze. She was a slave, marked not by chains around her wrists, but by the silence expected from her. Servants like her moved before sunrise, scrubbed courtyards before nobles woke, carried water from the palace wells, washed blood from warrior garments after border patrols, and bowed whenever a higher wolf passed. They were not allowed to meet the eyes of royal blood for too long. They were not allowed to linger near sacred chambers. They were not allowed to dream beyond duty. And yet, Zuri still dreamed, not loudly, not foolishly, only in small, secret ways. She dreamed when the morning fog rolled over the palace gardens and made the world look softer than it was. She dreamed when she touched healing herbs in the kitchen stores and remembered her mother's hands, gentle and steady, crushing leaves into medicine back in their village. She dreamed when she heard the river beyond the palace walls and imagined, just for a breath, that life could have chosen something kinder for her. But dreams were dangerous in a palace like this, especially dreams that involved the Alpha King. Zuberi was not merely a ruler, he was the spine of the kingdom. His name passed through the mouths of warriors with respect and through the mouths of enemies with fear. When he walked across the palace courtyard, conversations lowered. Servants stepped back, nobles straightened their shoulders. Even the air seemed to recognize him. He was everything Zuri was not. Power, freedom, command, wolf. The first time he noticed her, nothing happened. No words, no touch, no grand moment that anyone else would remember. Zuri had been carrying folded ceremonial cloths through the eastern walkway, where carved pillars opened toward the royal courtyard. Sunlight spilled across the stone floor in bright gold patches, and the scent of rain still clung to the air from the storm the night before. She kept her head low, as all servants were taught to do. Then the courtyard grew quiet. Zuberi had entered with 2 guards behind him, dressed in dark royal cloth trimmed with bronze beads. He moved with the controlled strength of a warrior who never needed to hurry because the world waited for him. Zuri stepped aside at once, lowering her gaze. But for one brief second, she felt it. His eyes on her. Not harshly, not carelessly. Not the way nobles looked at servants they expected to disappear. It was only a glance, but it rested on her long enough to make her fingers tighten around the cloths. Zuri did not look up fully. She would never dare. But she saw enough. The hard line of his jaw, the shadow beneath his eyes, the strange heaviness in his face, as if the mighty Alpha King was carrying more pain than his body wanted the world to know. Then he passed, and Zuri kept walking. Only later, when she was alone near the washing stones, did she realize she was smiling. The smile vanished the moment she noticed it. She pressed her lips together, angry at herself. A servant did not smile because a king had looked in her direction. A wolfless slave did not carry warmth in her chest because the alpha's gaze had paused on her. That kind of foolishness could ruin a life. Still, the memory stayed. It returned while she swept the hallways. It returned while she folded linen. It returned when other servants whispered about punishments, alliances, and palace gossip. Then the whispers changed. The Alpha King was ill. No one said it loudly. No one dared. But rumors moved through the servants' quarters faster than fire through dry grass. The king's hand had trembled during council. His breathing had grown uneven after a short walk from the throne hall. His eyes sometimes dilated strangely, turning dark and distant, as if something inside him was fighting to surface. Zuri tried not to care. It was not her place to care. But the healer in her noticed what the slave in her tried to ignore. The second encounter happened 3 days later. She was crossing the inner passage with a clay bowl of spiced broth meant for one of the noble guests. The corridor smelled of incense, rain-cooled stone, and crushed mint from the healer's wing. Her mind was tangled with the rumors of Zuberi's sickness, so tangled that she did not hear the footsteps turning the corner. She collided with him. The bowl slipped. Zuri gasped, already seeing her punishment before the broth even hit the floor. But a strong hand caught the edge of the bowl, and another steadied her arm. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Zuberi stood close enough for her to feel the warmth of him, close enough for her to notice what others were too afraid to see. His fingers trembled, only slightly, but enough. His breath came controlled, but not smoothly. His pupils were wide, darker than they should have been in the softened corridor light. He was ill, truly ill. Zuri froze. Zuberi's voice was low when he spoke. "Careful." One word, nothing more. But it entered her like a secret. She bowed quickly, cheeks burning, heart beating so hard she feared he would hear it. "Forgive me, my king." He released the bowl first, then her arm, but his gaze lingered, and in that small silence, Zuri felt something fragile and impossible stir inside her. Not hope. Hope was too dangerous. Not love. She did not know love. It was something smaller, stranger, like butterflies trapped beneath her ribs, like a question her heart had no permission to ask. He walked away. This time, Zuri looked after him. That night, she did what she had sworn she would never do inside the palace. She used the knowledge her mother had given her. In the servants' quarters, beneath the low glow of an oil lamp, she crushed bitter roots, moon leaf, river bark, and a pinch of dried silver grass. The mixture smelled sharp and earthy, like the healing huts of her childhood. Her hands remembered what palace life had tried to bury. Her mother's voice seemed to return with every movement. Medicine is not only for those who deserve kindness, Zuri. It is for those whose pain has found you. Before dawn, Zuri gave the remedy to Maiko, one of the healer's assistants, a quiet girl who had known her from the village roads before palace. Life swallowed them both. Nala stared at the wrapped vial with fear in her eyes. "Zuri, if they ask where this came from, tell them nothing," Zuri whispered. "Only place it among the healer's mixtures. Let them think it came from the old stores." Nala hesitated. Zuri's voice softened. "Please, he is getting worse." Nala looked at her for a long moment, then hid the vial beneath her shawl. Days passed. The king improved. Not completely. Not enough for celebration, but enough for the whispers to shift again. His steps became steadier. His voice returned stronger during council. The healers praised the ancestors. The elders burned incense at the shrine. No one knew the remedy had begun in the hands of a wolfless slave. No one except Maiko and Zuri wanted it that way. But fate was not finished with her. One afternoon, during preparations for a noble gathering in the courtyard, a young noble boy suddenly collapsed near the carved fountain. His body convulsed against the stone. Women screamed. Servants scattered. Warriors called for the palace healers, but the boy's lips had already begun to pale. Zuri moved before she could think. She dropped the basket in her hands, rushed forward, and pressed her fingers beneath the boy's jaw. She turned his head, forced his airway clear, crushed a bitter emergency herb between her fingers, and placed it beneath his tongue. Her movements were swift, precise, fearless. The courtyard fell silent. When the boy finally dragged in a breath, the sound seemed to shake the entire palace. Only then did Zuri look up. Zuberi was watching, not from a distance this time, not in passing. He had seen everything. His expression did not change, but his eyes did. They sharpened with recognition, curiosity, and something deeper than either. Zuri's stomach tightened. In that moment, she understood that the worst thing had happened. The Alpha had truly seen her. By sunset, the order came. Zuri was to be moved from general palace duty to the Alpha's personal servants. No explanation was given. No one questioned it. In the palace, the Alpha's command was law. But Zuri knew. She knew this was no accident. She knew he had placed her closer because he wanted answers. Because he had noticed her hands, her skill, her silence, perhaps even the strange pull she herself had been trying to deny. As she carried her few belongings toward the servants' wing closest to the royal chambers, her heart battled itself. A foolish part of her remembered his hand, steadying her arm, his quiet word in the corridor. Till. The kingdom was a realm of contrasts, wild beauty wrapped in an unyielding rule. The air was thick with the scent of earth and foliage, the warmth of the sun beating down on the vast jungle that surrounded the great stone walls of the royal palace. The howls of wolves echoed through the trees at night, their voices calling to the ancestors, to the moon, to the land that had birthed them. And within the palace, there was the hum of power, the scent of incense and secrets mixing in the grand halls, where the Alpha King ruled with unchallenged authority. But beneath the surface of the Alpha's strength, there was a weakening. The curse had grown stronger, feeding on his life force, drawing the strength of his bloodline to the brink of collapse. Yet Zuberi, the mighty king, refused to show weakness. He would never let the pack see it. Not now, not ever. In the heart of the palace, where the air was thick with the scent of burning wood and the crackling fire from the royal hearth, Amina stood tall, her presence commanding the space. The flames flickered against the delicate curves of her face, casting light and shadow that danced over her beauty. Strong, yet soft. She was the embodiment of grace, poise, and power, a woman of undeniable allure, whose every movement held the attention of those around her. Amina's beauty was more than just her striking features, though. It was in the way she carried herself, like a queen waiting for her coronation. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back in soft waves, reaching her waist like silk spun from the night itself. Her eyes, deep like the moonlit sky, could pierce through anyone with a single glance. They held secrets, mysteries, and a quiet strength, a stark contrast to the warmth of her smile, which many had come to cherish. Amina was devoted to the Alpha, a loyalty that ran deeper than just political necessity. It was personal. Her bond with Zuberi went beyond what most could understand. Their families had been intertwined for generations, their bloodlines mingling since the dawn of the kingdom. From childhood, she had stood by Zuberi's side, and over time, their closeness had deepened. To the kingdom, she was seen as the future Luna, the future Alpha's mate, and their bond was expected to seal the future of the pack. But for Zuberi, Amina had always been more than that. She was his confidant, a close friend. Their friendship had never quite fit the mold that the rest of the pack expected of a future Luna and Alpha. They shared moments of laughter, quiet conversations by the fire, and unspoken understanding that ran deeper than romance. Zuberi valued her in ways he had never valued anyone else, but he saw her, in many ways, as a sister, a trusted ally, a partner in leadership. Yet Amina dreamed of more. She couldn't deny the small pang in her heart whenever Zuberi's gaze lingered on others, especially on someone like Zuri, the wolfless servant who had somehow begun to occupy more space in his thoughts. It was a growing discomfort, unsettling, and yet Amina could not ignore it. Her wolf senses were on high alert. She could feel the competition, even if it was just in the subtlest shifts of Zuberi's gaze. She doesn't belong here, not like I do. She's a distraction, Amina murmured quietly. Her wolf persona fluid, predatory, and purposeful. With instinct sharpened every time Zuberi's attention wandered, every time he appeared to notice someone or something that threatened her position. Not far from Amina, standing slightly off to the side with his arms folded, was Khalid, the beta of the kingdom, though not just any beta. Khalid was Zuberi's cousin, part of the royal family by blood, but he often carried himself like an outsider, a man who felt the weight of his legacy and yet never seemed to fully belong. Though raised beside Zuberi, he had never shared his cousin's dreams of ruling the pack. Instead, he had always hung in the background, watching the world around him, taking in every political shift, every subtle power play. His ambitions were far from pure. Khalid, smiling with a hint of mischief, his voice low. "You know, Amina, Zuberi is getting weaker by the day. Soon, he will need someone to help him carry this burden." Amina, eyes narrowing, meeting his gaze. "I am his mate. I will help him." Khalid, chuckling softly, as if testing her patience. Of course. But the pack might see things differently. We both know how fragile the Alpha's position is. What happens if they question his strength? Though his words were measured, he was no stranger to ambition. In fact, it ran deep in his veins, though it was veiled by charm and calculated politeness. Though publicly respected as the beta, underneath the politeness, the charm, was a hunger that only grew as Zuberi's health faltered. Amina and Khalid, two figures tied to the Alpha by duty, by blood, and by ambition, spoke little of their true desires, but their presence in the palace was a quiet storm. But both had their own motives, and the balance of power in the palace was far from certain. Far from the quiet politics of noble bloodlines and royal fire pits, Zuri carried out her duties in the heat of the palace kitchens, where smoke clung to the rafters and the air smelled of roasted meat, crushed pepper, wet firewood, and fresh herbs. The kitchen was alive with movement. Servants rushed from one end to the other with clay bowls, woven trays, steaming pots, and water gourds balanced on their hips. Orders flew from the head cook's mouth. Knives struck wooden boards in sharp rhythms. Outside, warriors laughed in the courtyard, their deep voices rising with the pride of wolves who knew they belonged to the world. Zuri moved through it all in silence. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than protest. A slave already lived under the weight of another person's command, but a wolfless slave carried an even heavier shame. Among the pack, slavery was humiliation enough. It meant your hands belonged to labor, your back belonged to punishment, and your voice belonged to whoever stood above you. But to be wolfless on top of that was to be considered unfinished, almost empty, as if the ancestors had started making you and then turned away before completing the work. That was the mystery that followed Zuri everywhere. No one understood why she had never shifted. No one understood why her body carried wolf blood, but no wolf had ever risen from within her. During the rites of passage, while other young wolves screamed under the moon and came out reborn with claws, fangs, and glowing eyes, Zuri had stood alone, trembling under the elder's gaze, waiting for a beast that never came. Since then, people had spoken of her as if she were a warning. Some said her bloodline had offended the spirits. Some said her mother's healing gifts had come at a price. Others believed she was simply cursed. Zuri never answered them. She only carried the questions quietly. Her only friend, Paula, worked beside her, wiping oil from a serving bowl with quick, restless hands. Paula was a servant too, but she had what Zuri did not. She had a wolf. Even in servant cloth, even with ash on her cheek and sweat on her brow, there was a difference in how others looked at her. Paula could shift. Paula could hear distant movement before human ears caught it. Paula could smell fear, blood, rain, and danger in the wind. Paula belonged to the pack in a way Zuri had never been allowed to belong. Even their punishments were different. If Paula made a mistake, she was scolded as a low-ranking wolf. If Zuri made a mistake, she was reminded that she was barely wolf at all. Paula glanced over her shoulder, making sure the head cook was not listening, then leaned closer to Zuri. "You've heard, right?" she whispered. "The Alpha, he's getting worse." Zuri did not look up immediately. She kept arranging the carved bowls on the tray, one beside the other, her fingers steady, even though the words struck something inside her. "I've heard," she said quietly. "But it is not our place to worry about him." Paula frowned, lowering her voice even more. "I know. But the whole palace is talking. The healers are restless. The witches from the river shrine came before sunrise, and the elder women burned black incense in the healing court. This is not ordinary sickness." Zuri's fingers paused for half a breath. The healing court. She had passed near it earlier and smelled the bitter smoke herself. It was not the scent used for fever, wounds, or battle exhaustion. It was deeper, older, the kind of smoke her mother once burned when she feared a sickness had roots in the spirit. Paula leaned closer. "They say it is his bloodline, something too old to name, something even the palace healers are afraid to touch." Zuri lifted the tray, pretending the words meant nothing. "Then let the palace healers be afraid. We are servants, Paula. Fear is already part of our duty." Paula gave her a look, half annoyed, half worried. "You always speak like your heart is made of stone." Zuri's mouth curved faintly. "That is because soft hearts do not survive long in kitchens." Paula almost smiled, but the worry did not leave her face. "You joke too much when you are troubled. And you worry too loudly for someone trying to whisper." Paula shook her head, but her eyes softened. She knew Zuri better than anyone in the palace. She knew when Zuri's wit was only a wall. She knew when her silence was not obedience, but defense. For a moment, the noise of the kitchen seemed to dim around them. Zuri glanced toward the high palace windows, where sunlight cut through the smoke in pale golden lines. Somewhere beyond those walls, the Alpha King sat surrounded by healers, witches, elders, warriors, and noble advisors. Everyone impure. Zuri's fingers paused for half a breath. The healing court. She had passed near it earlier and smelled the bitter smoke herself. It was not the scent used for fever, wounds, or battle exhaustion. It was deeper, older, the kind of smoke her mother once burned when she feared a sickness had roots in the spirit. Paula leaned closer. They say it is his bloodline, something too old to name, something even the palace healers are afraid to touch. Zuri lifted the tray, pretending the words meant nothing. Then let the palace healers be afraid. We are servants, Paula. Fear is already part of our duty. Paula gave her a look, half annoyed, half worried. You always speak like your heart is made of stone. Zuri's mouth curved faintly. That is because soft hearts do not survive long in kitchens. Paula almost smiled, but the worry did not leave her face. You joke too much when you are troubled, and you worry too loudly for someone trying to whisper. Paula shook her head, but her eyes softened. She knew Zuri better than anyone in the palace. She knew when Zuri's wit was only a wall. She knew when her silence was not obedience, but defense. For a moment, the noise of the kitchen seemed to dim around them. Zuri glanced toward the high palace windows, where sunlight cut through the smoke in pale golden lines. Somewhere beyond those walls, the Alpha King sat surrounded by healers, witches, elders, warriors, and noble advisors. Everyone important would be fighting to keep him alive. And yet, for reasons she could not explain, Zuri felt the news settle inside her as if it had been brought directly to her hands. She had no right to care, no right to wonder, no right to feel that strange tightening in her chest each time the Alpha's illness was mentioned. Still, the question would not leave her. If the curse was real, what did it mean for the kingdom? And why did a wolfless slave, a girl the pack had already decided was incomplete, feel as though some invisible thread was slowly pulling her toward the center of it? Inside the grand hall, the Alpha King Zuberi sat at the head of the long, obsidian table. Once an embodiment of unshakable strength, he now seemed diminished. His posture remained regal, but there was something in his eyes, something tired, like the weight of both the kingdom and the ancient curse that plagued his bloodline had started to erode him from within. By his side, Amina exuded a quiet but undeniable authority. Her gaze swept across the gathered council, her presence commanding attention, despite the fact that her position as Zuberi's mate had yet to be officially recognized by the pack. Khalid, standing beside her, leaned casually against the stone pillar, his eyes sharp and calculating. Though he was the beta of the pack, his took his role beyond that of title. Zuberi, his voice gravelly, breaking the silence. I've heard your concerns, but we will not succumb to this. We must keep control of the pack. The elders will see to it. The pack needs strength, not weakness. Elder, bowing his head, respectful but with a note of concern. Your Majesty, with all due respect, the curse is not so easily managed. It is a slow death, a burden that has taken down those before you. The bloodline is cursed. There is no cure. Amina, interjecting, her voice cool and controlled. We've discussed this already. I will not let this curse define us. We will find a way to manage it. The kingdom cannot afford to lose the Alpha. Not now. Not when the pack is so vulnerable. Khalid, stepping forward, his tone smooth, but his gaze piercing. Perhaps in times like these, strength comes from more than just the bloodline. Perhaps it comes from unity. He pauses, his words a deliberate challenge, but his eyes don't waver. A united front would serve the pack far better than mere blood. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of Khalid's words. It was clear. He wasn't just speaking about unity. He was suggesting something far more personal. His words were an implication, barely veiled. The king needed a Luna. He needed to choose a mate, produce an heir before the curse consumed him entirely. It was a matter of legacy, and Khalid's gaze remained fixed on Zuberi, daring him to face the uncomfortable truth. Amina's eyes flicked to Zuberi's face, then subtly shifted toward Khalid, sensing the shift in tone. Her expression was hard to read, but it was clear she saw merit in the suggestion. As Zuberi's mate, in all but name, Amina knew the pack's future was precariously tied to the Alpha's legacy. Her influence on him was growing, but so were the stakes for both of them. Perhaps Khalid's words were more than just a suggestion. Perhaps they were a nudge in the right direction. Zuberi, with strained impatience, silenced them in a controlled voice. "We will not discuss this further today. The pack is loyal. It is my duty to lead, to ensure their safety." The council fell into an uneasy silence, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Yet, in the midst of it all, Zuberi's gaze drifted toward the open window. This was the first time the Alpha had ever been distracted. His usually unyielding focus faltered, his eyes now fixed outside, beyond the confines of the palace walls. Both Khalid and Amina followed his gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Through the window, they saw Zuri, an unremarkable servant, moving through the royal grounds. Her eyes were downcast, her posture humble as she went about her chores. She was unaware of their attention, her innocence in stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere within the palace. For a brief moment, Zuberi's gaze softened, his posture slackening just slightly, as if something in his chest tightened. The Alpha was no longer solely focused on the political discourse. His mind seemed to momentarily wander, drawn to the presence of the lowly servant, an inexplicable connection swirling in his thoughts, though he quickly masked it with a hardened expression. Amina's lips tightened, and Khalid's eyes narrowed, both aware of the subtle shift in their Alpha. The tension in the room mounted once more, but this time, the unspoken truth was clear. Zuri, the servant, was now irrevocably tied to the heart of the royal family's struggle, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Far from the royal chambers, Zuri stood quietly in the corner of the healer's quarters, her presence unnoticed in the frenzy of activity. The room was thick with the scent of medicinal oils, herbs, and burning incense, the air heavy with the pungent odor of both fresh and dried herbs hanging from every beam, filling the room with an earthy aroma. Bundles of dried lavender, rosemary, and thyme swayed in the soft breeze, their purple flowers a contrast against the deep green of dried neem and bitter leaf. Fresh roots of ginger and turmeric were piled on the workbench, their colors vibrant against the shadowed corners. Bitter herbs like scent leaf were tied in long strings, their dried tendrils draped like spider webs across the room. The walls were lined with jars filled with powders and oils, baobab oil, shea butter, clove oil, and honey from sacred bees, each jar carefully labeled in the healer's fine script. These concoctions were known to cure everything from fever, malaria, and headaches to deep spiritual cleanses for troubled souls. Amidst this chaotic yet purposeful setting, the soft hum of healing chants filled the space as the healer's assistants moved from task to task. Zuri was used to it, the frantic, energetic atmosphere of the healer's quarters. She was used to being unseen. Her hands moved deftly as she prepared her secret medicines, precise, practiced motions, mixing grounded herbs with healing oils to create a potent mixture. Yet, her mind was elsewhere, on the king, on the whispers she had overheard about his deteriorating health. Malaria, they said, tremors, weakness. And then, there were the darker rumors, the curse. A curse that could not be healed, only managed. A curse that had plagued his bloodline for generations. Zuri didn't dare entertain thoughts of the Alpha King, not in the way others did. She was a wolfless servant, bound by the duties of her role, the invisible lines drawn by the pack's expectations. Despite her lowly position, though, there was something that kept pulling her toward him. Something about his vulnerability, a quietness that she had glimpsed in moments when he was alone, when his strength faltered. That humanity, so different from the hardened exterior the world saw, stirred something within her. She had seen the pain in his eyes, and wondered if it was the same anguish she had felt for so long. Maiko, the healer's assistant, glanced up from her work and caught Zuri's gaze. Her tone was heavy with concern as she broke the silence, her words laced with urgency. Maiko, with a knowing look. "You've heard, haven't you? The Alpha's health. It's not improving. The curse, it's worse than anyone thought." Zuri, softly, barely above a whisper, looking down to avoid her gaze. "I've heard the whispers." Maiko, nodding, her expression serious, moving closer as she speaks in hushed tones. "The curse that runs through his bloodline. It's been passed down for generations. No one knows the full truth, but it's a slow, terrible death. It begins with weakness, tremors, shortness of breath, fading strength." She looks around to ensure no one else is listening. "The pack, they don't speak of it, but it's taking him. And soon it will be too much to hide." Zuri's hand stilled, her fingers trembling as she continued mixing the herbs, her mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of what Maiko was saying. The Alpha King, once a towering figure of Po, now crumbling under a curse that could not be defeated. Her heart tightened at the thought. But why did it feel so personal? Why did her connection to this mysterious affliction seem so undeniable? Was it fate? Or something else? Zuri could not afford to ignore the pull. As she made her way back from the healer's quarters, carrying her herbal supplies and thinking deeply about what Maiko had said, she rounded a corner of the palace, only to nearly collide with a familiar figure. Zuberi, the Alpha King, was walking toward her, his presence commanding as always. But the moment their paths were set to cross, Zuri's instincts kicked in, and she darted quickly to the side, taking another route through the palace hallways. Zuberi, ever composed, didn't show it, but his sharp eyes caught the sudden change in her course. A small, curious smile tugged at his lips as he watched her move. His mind wandered, wondering to himself. Zuberi, thinking, amused. What's gotten into her? But his gaze remained steady, and he chose not to acknowledge it, choosing instead to continue on his path, his thoughts fleeting. Yet, there was something about the way she bolted so quickly that left an odd sense of intrigue behind, posed expression. The night descended with a heavy, almost tangible anticipation as the blood moon loomed high in the sky, casting an eerie crimson glow across the pack grounds. The sacred ritual was about to begin, a long-standing tradition woven into the fabric of their existence, and the air was thick with tension. The ancient chants resonated from the heart of the ceremonial circle, where elders and shamans stood, their voices blending with the rhythmic sound of drums, each beat echoing through the air like the pulse of the earth itself. Zuri, though a servant, found herself drawn into the energy of the celebration, her heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and excitement. The pack had gathered in full force, wolves of all ranks, showcasing their strength, their primal abilities on full display. The warriors paraded their fighting skills, demonstrating powerful leaps and graceful, lethal swipes as they shape-shifted and morphed mid-dance, the moonlight illuminating their rippling muscles and fierce, glowing eyes. It was a night of revelry, a celebration of their bloodline, their might. The Omegas, the lowest of the pack, positioned themselves carefully near the king, their eyes watchful and their movements calculated. They had learned long ago that visibility was crucial on such nights, especially with the Alpha's attention focused on the pack's display. The Omegas danced softly, weaving between the shadows, hoping to catch the king's eye, to be seen as more than the servants they were labeled as. The air seemed to shimmer with the scent of freshly burnt sage and the heady mixture of wild herbs used in the sacred offerings. The shamans moved like ghosts, draped in cloaks of animal furs, their faces hidden behind intricately carved masks. They muttered prayers to the ancestors, their voices barely audible over the rising crescendo of howls and songs. At the center of it all, the blood sacrifices were being made. Goats, roosters, and other animals. Their blood flowing freely into sacred bowls, mingling with the offering of herbs and oils. The scent of incense was overpowering, curling around the dancers and the pack, as the elders called for the spirits to bless the pack with strength, prosperity, and unbreakable unity. The ritual wasn't just an act of devotion. It was a challenge, a plea to the spirits for the survival of the pack, especially on a night when the blood moon threatened to disrupt everything. In the distance, Zuberi, the Alpha King, stood apart, watching the ceremony unfold with an intensity that was hard to ignore. His gaze was sharp, his expression unreadable, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Despite the outward grandeur of the ritual, he could sense that the pack's strength was slipping. The wolves, fierce and proud, were growing restless, and with each passing day, the weight of his deteriorating health seemed to bear heavier on his shoulders. His eyes flicked over to the Omegas, the lowliest members of the pack, their movements fluid and practiced as they tried to earn the Alpha's favor. And then, as if by instinct, his attention locked on Zuri. She was there, laughing among her peers, her usually humble demeanor forgotten for the moment. The carefree spirit she wore like an unfamiliar cloak was almost unrecognizable. Her laughter rang out, light and genuine, her eyes sparkling as she joined in with the others in their jubilant celebration. The chains of her status, the heavy weight of her lowly position, seemed to slip away, like a burden she had temporarily cast aside. The contrast to her usual reserved nature was striking, and for reasons he couldn't yet understand, Zuberi found himself intrigued. There was something about her that pulled at him, something that made him uneasy, yet strangely drawn to her. It wasn't just the boldness of her sudden confidence, nor the way her laughter cut through the tension of the ritual, but the shift in her entire presence. The servant girl, who so often kept her head down, who moved like a shadow among the pack, was now alive with a lightness that seemed to defy her position. Zuberi couldn't quite reconcile the two images, the timid girl who had avoided his gaze with a bowed head, and the carefree woman who now stood at the center of the revelry. His thoughts flickered back to earlier, when he had seen her try to evade him, bolting away from his presence as though she couldn't bear to be near him. A servant girl was something he could easily ignore, a humble, unseen figure in the shadows of the palace. But this woman, this version of Zuri with laughter in her eyes and joy in her step, made him wonder if he had underestimated her all along. She was not just a servant. She was someone who had hidden away a side of herself that no one had seen, not even him. Zuberi felt a strange, foreign twinge of curiosity. Was it intrigue or something more? Why was he so drawn to her now, at this moment when everything about her seemed to shift? Was it just the stark contrast from what he had seen before? The more he observed, the more his interest in her grew, not just in the way she carried herself now, but in a deeper sense. He wanted to understand her more, to see beyond the servant mask she wore so well. What else did she hide beneath that quiet exterior? What was it about Zuri that stirred something in him, something he hadn't anticipated? The growing dissonance in his thoughts was unsettling. Zuberi, the powerful Alpha King, the one who led with strength and authority, now found himself caught in an emotional current he couldn't control. He had no use for servants, especially not one like her. Zuberi's fingers curled involuntarily into a fist as he watched her. The more he tried to distance himself from his thoughts, the more compelling the idea became. What was her true nature? He had no need for servants, but there was something in Zuri's smile, in the way she seemed to shine amidst the chaos, that made him feel a curiosity he wasn't prepared for. In that moment, he realized he was no longer just watching a servant. He was watching someone else. And that someone was now imprinted in his mind. After the night's festivities and ritualistic displays of strength and unity, Zuri, caught in the intoxicating energy of the celebration and fueled by the potent monkey tail brew, wandered far from the others. The air was now thick with the afterglow of the moon, the forest calling to her, beckoning her into its shadowy embrace. She stumbled drunkenly through the woods, the blood moon's glow illuminating the path just enough for her to see the dark trees and hear the whispering wind. If anyone had seen her, they might have called it foolhardy. But Zuri was lost in the exhilaration of the night, the rhythmic chants still echoing in her ears, the memories of laughter and freedom alive in her heart. She was free, if only for a fleeting moment. But danger loomed. The masquerades, spirits in the form of night-roaming wolves, were known to wander under the blood moon, hunting for sacrifices to offer to the gods. As the curfew bell rang through the night, signaling the end of the celebration, the pack scattered to their homes. But Zuberi, ever the solitary figure, chose to walk alone. He sought peace away from his royal duties, away from the pressure of being the pack's leader. But as he walked, his senses suddenly spiked. A familiar scent filled the air. It was a wolf scent, but not one he could easily place. Before he could process, his wolf stirred within him, its primal instincts taking over. Zuberi's wolf was suddenly out of control, running through the woods as if guided by some invisible force, a hunger and desire driving him. He followed the scent, chasing it down with an urgency that even his own mind couldn't understand. The world blurred around him, and when he finally found the source of the scent, it was Zuri, laying on the ground, drunken and unaware of the danger around her. The moonlight caught her features, delicate, petite, her mouth slightly parted, her brow furrowed even in sleep. His wolf urged him forward, an overwhelming pull to protect her. Zuberi found himself kneeling beside her, his hands shaking as he reached to wake her. But Zuri was unresponsive, clinging to him in her sleep, her fingers wrapped around his arm with surprising strength. He tried to pry her fingers off, but her grip was tenacious, and he found himself fascinated by how she clung to him, her body pressed so close to his. In that moment, something shifted inside him, an attraction he had never expected, a desire he couldn't shake. His fingers traced her delicate eyebrows, the touch soft, almost reverent. Zuri murmured in her sleep, her voice soft and incoherent, trying to nestle closer to him. Zuberi was getting carried away, his heart racing, his senses clouded by her closeness. But then, her murmurs, the faint whispers, shocked him back to reality. He realized the compromising position he had put himself in. Quickly, he withdrew his hand, pulling back and shaking himself free from the confusion. His wolf was still restless, wanting more, but Zuberi forced control over the animal within. Zuberi, thinking to himself, voice tight. What is it about her? He carefully picked her up, carrying her back to the servant quarters, her small frame against his chest. She was delirious, her breath warm on his skin as he walked. Despite his intentions to remain detached, a part of him couldn't help but notice how right it felt to carry her, how the scent of her lingered in his senses, unrelenting. The space was tiny and had located her room in the servants' quarters by instinct, guided by his wolf. He didn't doubt if he had found the right room. Zuri looked at the bundle of softness in his arms, laying peacefully as if she was his. He gently laid her on the bed, her form immediately curled into the blankets, her hair spilling over the pillow in soft waves. For the first time, Zuberi took in her appearance with unguarded eyes. The moonlight sculpted her delicate features, casting shadows that danced along her smooth skin. He noted the soft curve of her body, the natural way her hips swelled, creating an alluring silhouette under the faded cloth of her servant dress. Her waist, though slender, was shaped with gentle curves, and despite the humble nature of her clothing, there was no denying the feminine grace she exuded even in sleep. His gaze lingered, but almost as soon as the thoughts flashed through his mind, Zuberi snapped back to reality, his body stiffening as he mentally recoiled. This was wrong. He was the Alpha King, the leader of the pack, the one who commanded strength and control. She was a servant beneath his status, and the gap between them was more than just physical. It was a symbol, the flag of power that could never be crossed, not by him. He had a kingdom to rule, a pack to guide, and issues far greater than his own personal desires to focus on. Zuberi breathed deeply, forcing himself to pull away from the dangerous line of thought his mind had dangerously wandered toward. The status gap between them was as large as any river could be, and any untoward advances would have devastating consequences, not only for him, but for her as well. If the court were to suspect any inappropriate interest, Zuri, a mere servant, would be the one to bear the brunt of the pack's hostility and judgment. The Alpha could endure the gossip, the whispers. He was powerful, untouchable. But Zuri would never be afforded the same protection. As he stood over her, his conflicted thoughts raged within him. His primal instincts, the deep-rooted part of him that was both alpha wolf and man, wanted to claim her, wanted to take her in his arms and hold her. But his duty to the pack and the safety of the girl he had barely even known prevented it. Taking one last lingering look at her, Zuberi couldn't help but feel the magnetic pull in his chest, the inexplicable draw he felt toward this woman, a servant who seemed to have no place in his world. Something about her was different, something that neither his kingdom nor his heart had prepared for. As Zuberi turned away, a whisper of doubt slithered through his mind. Yet he paused, the weight of his thoughts heavier than the pack's burdens. Chapter 2. A sudden, unnatural chill sweeps through the room, despite the warm hearth fire crackling nearby. The flickering shadows on the stone walls dance in erratic patterns, like spirits on the move. Zuberi is asleep in his bed, but he shifts restlessly, his brow furrowed in a deep, haunted dream. His heartbeat quickened, echoing in his ears, a wild rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the land, unnatural, chaotic. Zuberi, breathing heavily, voice hoarse. "What is happening to me?" He sits up in bed, his chest heaving as sweat pours from his body. His vision blurs, the room spinning. He feels an overwhelming heat course through him, as though his blood itself is on fire. But the pain isn't just physical. It's spiritual, something deep and ancient, pulling at his very soul. His vision is suddenly filled with flickering shadows of haunting memories of his ancestors, their tortured faces twisting in agony. He sees them, those before him who succumbed to the same curse, their bodies decaying from within, their spirits unable to escape the grip of the curse. Zuberi, eyes wide with panic. "No, not this." He stumbles out of bed, his claws elongating, his fangs gnashing, the insatiable hunger rising within him. But even as his wolf form fully emerges, something darker hangs in the air, an eerie silence that follows him like a shadow. Zuberi screams, "What is this force controlling me?" Outside, in the heart of the kingdom, the wind howls. The shaman's incantation grows louder, echoing through the walls of the palace, as if calling to Zuberi. The curse is tied to the land, to the ancient power of witchcraft. It feeds off Zuberi's blood, and with the moon hidden behind clouds, the pack's fate becomes uncertain. The healers, the Queen Mother, and the entire king's household were caught in a state of frantic confusion, each of them moving like clockwork. But there was no plan. there was only the panic. Amina, the alpha's mate, paced nervously, her usually composed demeanor shattered by the overwhelming sense of dread that had fallen over the palace. The room was thick with tension. Every step, every breath felt heavier than the last. The healers from every corner of the pack were summoned, each one working frantically to treat the alpha's failing health. Healers from other packs were on their way, but none arrived in time. There was no answer to the curse, no remedy in sight. The herbalists and shamans had long since run out of options, and the alpha's condition continued to worsen. His body was weakening, his spirit retreating. Outside the palace, the gathering storm clouds seemed to mirror the chaos inside. The air was suffocating, as if the entire kingdom was holding its breath, waiting for an inevitable tragedy to unfold. It was as though the very earth was anxiously awaiting the fall of their king, and the burden of the pack's future pressed down on Amina's shoulders more heavily than ever. By the time nightfall came, bringing with it a cold, biting breeze that swept through the royal halls, the Beta burst into the chamber, his breath heavy and panicked. Beta, rushing in, voice strained. "My king, my queen. The rival pack's armies have attacked the weak part of our borders. They're taking advantage of the Alpha's health. We are under assault. This could be the end of everything." The room erupted into chaos. The Queen Mother, her face pale with worry, clutched her chest as if the news had physically struck her. Amina froze, her eyes wide in disbelief, but there was no time for panic. She straightened immediately, her heart racing, the heavy weight of the situation pressing against her chest. In the middle of this frenzy, Maiko dashed out of the king's chamber, her eyes desperate, as if Hiar had just realized something critical. She knew what needed to be done, and there was no time to waste. She found Zuri, who had been moving quietly about, tending to the unspoken needs of the palace, her presence always unnoticed, always in the shadows. Maliko seized her arm, dragging her urgently toward the chamber where the chief priest waited. Zuri's heart raced as she was thrust into a room filled with watchful eyes, all of them expecting answers. But there was only one man who could make decisions now: Elder Selfu, the chief priest and the head herbalist. Maiko, speaking quickly with voice frantic. "This is Zuri. She's the one who made the healing potions for the Alpha, the mystery ones that brought him back when no one else could. She must help him now. You must listen to her." Elder Selfu, calmly but with a sharp edge in his voice, nodding to dismiss everyone else in the room. "Leave us. Everyone else out. This matter is not for the many." One by one, the others in the room filtered out, leaving Zuri and the elder alone, the silence almost suffocating. Elder Selfu, his voice deep and unwavering, though his eyes flickered with suspicion. "I know what you've done. The potions you made for the Alpha saved him. For a time. But I need to understand. What is it you truly know? We are out of options. The curse will consume him completely if we don't act swiftly." Zuri's heart raced in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She wasn't just a lowly girl. She had been called here to face the pack's fate. She had been given the chance to prove herself, not only as someone who could heal, but as someone capable of saving them all. Zuri, with voice barely a whisper, but filled with quiet determination, replies, "I will do my best. There's a stronger potion, one I've never tried myself, but I've seen my mother prepare it. It's made from rare minerals, herbs, and substances I've gathered, things that I've never dared use on anyone, not until now. It has healed the most critical wounds, even saving a noble woman on the brink of death. But this is something else entirely." She turned quickly, moving to the table where the fresh herbs lay scattered. The sweet scent of basil mixed with the sharp, peppery tang of neem leaves as she worked. She gathered roots of ginger, turmeric, and clove, their familiar warmth wrapping her in memories of her mother's old healing room, a place filled with bottles and jars of dried flowers and powdered leaves. Zuri, her voice shaking slightly, though she tried to stay calm. "I'll need saffron, bone marrow, and distilled sage. They're rare, but I can make it work. It'll need to be prepared carefully, or it might not be strong enough. If the Alpha's curse is as strong as we fear, this might be the last chance we have." She began working quickly, grinding and mixing, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had seen these remedies before, but never under such dire circumstances. The heat of the moment made her hands tremble, but she knew she had no choice but to succeed. The potion shimmered, a deep, pulsing green, the color of life and death, of healing and destruction. Zuri looked at the vial in her hand, her heart heavy. Elder Selfu nodded gravely, pouring the potion into the Alpha's mouth as Zuri looked on with bated breath. The minutes stretched like hours. For a long moment, nothing happened. Zuberi's breathing was shallow, his body rigid under the weight of the curse. But then, a deep, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The room seemed to lighten. Zuberi's breath deepened, the color slowly returning to his face. His muscles began to relax. Zuberi's eyes fluttered open after a few moments. His gaze was still unfocused at first, but soon his sharp, authoritative stare settled onto Zuri's face. The Alpha's strength, once faded, began to resurface. Zuberi says with a hoarse voice, You saved me." Zuri, still trembling, speaking softly but with conviction, responds, "I only did what I could. The curse isn't gone, my king. But for now, you're alive." Zuberi, with his voice rising with a power that crackled through the room, breaks the tense silence, commands, "Leave us, Elder Selfu. Now." Zuberi, the Alpha King, sat up with a grimace, his body still weak, but the color had returned to his face, the pallor fading. He had been so deeply affected by the curse that even this small motion seemed monumental. His broad chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, the once towering figure now reduced, frail. The way his dark hair fell around his face, untamed from the sweat of his transformation, made him look even more vulnerable than before. There was muscle under the weariness of his form, strong lines, etched jaw, and high cheekbones, features that once commanded respect, now softened by exhaustion. Zuri stood quietly near him, watching as he tried to sit upright, the weight of his own body pressing against him. Without thinking, she instinctively stepped forward to assist him, her hands reaching out as if drawn by an invisible pull. Surprisingly, Zuberi didn't recoil. His tired gaze met hers, and she immediately noticed the vulnerability in his eyes, the crack in his carefully constructed mask. His lips were parted slightly, as if he had intended to speak, but he didn't. There was a heavy tension in the air that felt both strange and familiar. Zuri, standing just inches away, felt a strange pull in her chest, something she couldn't describe. Her heart raced, and Zuri's heart was racing, her hands trembling as the realization hit her like a wave. This was her bond. Her mate was the Alpha King. Zuberi, the one man she could never have, would never be allowed to have. But fate had other plans. As she backed away, her mind spinning, Zuberi's gaze softened. Yet there was no escaping what had just happened. Neither of them could outrun the mystical pull that had just connected their souls. Zuberi, his voice softer now, though still firm, with a trace of exhaustion beneath it, says, "You saved me, but you don't know what you've done, do you? I've never felt anything like this before. What did you do to me?" Zuri's mind raced. Her palms were sweaty, her breath quick and shallow. The bond, the mate bond, still pulsed between them, an invisible thread that connected their souls. She tried to break free of the feeling, tried to hide her shock, but it was no use. Zuri, with cracking voice, trying to pull herself together, responded, "I don't know, my king. I didn't do anything. I didn't mean to." Zuberi interrupts her with a scorf. The sound was like a cold shock to her spine. She had known the moment the bond formed, the electricity in the air, the way it swallowed them whole. But hearing him say it aloud made the reality of their connection all the more terrifying. Zuri, with hands still trembling, eyes wide with the growing horror of what was unfolding, continued stammering, I didn't ask for this. Please, my king, Zuberi's gaze softened for a fleeting second, but his primal reaction was far from over. With deftness not expected of a man in recovery, he dragged her down on the bedding beside him, the realization that this bond could consume them both beginning to hit her fully. The space between them was now charged with something far more dangerous than just their physical proximity. This time, his voice quieter, almost hoarse with restrained emotion. He says, "You don't know what this means, do you? What this bond means for us." His hand reached out, a trembling finger grazing the side of her cheek, sending a shiver through her body. Her heart skipped a beat, mind reeling and eyes dashing to avoid the alpha's steely gaze. She couldn't respond. In wolf culture, the mate bond was revered, but also feared. It meant that both wolves, the alpha and the mate, would face their greatest trials together. For the alpha, it was more complicated. Their strength was their kingdom, their control over their pack, their legacy. But a mate bond could expose even the most powerful alpha to their deepest vulnerabilities, and when that bond was formed with someone of lower rank, like Zuri, it threatened to undermine everything. The king withdrew his hand, his face hardening with resolve once again. His primal instincts were at war with his duty as alpha, and he knew he had no place entertaining such desires. But the bond, that connection, was too powerful to ignore. Zuberi, gritting his teeth, spoke with a strained voice as he tried to regain control. We can't do this. I have no place for this. Not with a servant." The words were bitter, though they came out with a force that felt almost like a plea, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince her. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he knew it didn't feel true. Not entirely. The connection, the bond, had shifted something in him, but he couldn't afford to acknowledge it. Not now. Not with so much at stake. He turned away, unable to meet her eyes anymore, but the tension in the room remained thick, charged. And then, just as the moment of silence stretched too long, the heavy sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the chamber. Amina, her sharp gaze always alert, entered the room with grace, her eyes scanning the scene before her. She had been seeking her mate, but the sight before her made her stop in her tracks. The Alpha King and Zuri, so close, eyes barely a breath apart, were frozen in a way that made Amina's heart skip a beat. Chapter 3. Now over a week since the Alpha's health had been stabilized, and life within the palace had returned to a grudging normalcy. Zuri still found herself drawn into the constant whirl of duties, but something had changed. Her once brief and routine interactions with Zuberi, the Alpha King, were now fraught with unspoken tension. Every time she had to step into his chambers to deliver his medication, it felt as though the air itself thickened with a heavy weight. Her heart would race, her hands would shake, and yet she could never show it. Zuberi, despite his vulnerability, was still the king, and she, the wolfless servant, was never to forget her place. The curse had not been defeated, and the Alpha's health still required constant monitoring. Elder Selfu, aware of Zuri's talents with herbs and potions, had now made her responsible for monitoring the king's dosage, reporting to the pack doctor who had been overseeing his care. But every moment in his presence was emotionally taxing, for Zuri and for the Alpha King himself. Amina, always with a watchful eye, had made Zuri's existence a living hell. She had never openly confronted her, at least not directly, but every passing moment felt like a quiet rebuke. The jealousy and suspicion that Amina held simmered beneath the surface, often revealing itself in the sharp, venomous stares she cast at Zuri. Despite knowing the importance of the king's health, Amina couldn't hide the raw envy that grew each time she saw Zuri, the servant girl, near Zuberi. Amina had never been allowed the kind of close proximity to the Alpha that Zuri now had, despite Amina being the Alpha's self-titled mate. And this, more than anything, infuriated her. Zuberi was unreachable to everyone except those closest to him. And now it seemed that Zuri, the lowly servant, had found herself in a space she shouldn't have. One of those days, when the court was in session, Zuri had to deliver feathers for their ink. Amina found a way to manipulate the council into demanding Zuri shift in their presence. It was a bold move, one that only Amina could have pulled off, using her charm and wit to create a strategic distraction. The Alpha King was present, his eyes as sharp as ever. But when Zuri shifted, or rather, when she did not, Zuberi's shock was palpable. He had never known that Zuri, the servant girl, his fated mate, was wolfless. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. Zuri, despite all the days spent in his presence, had hidden this from him, and in that moment, his understanding of her changed completely. The air in the room seemed to freeze, his thoughts swirling as he processed the gravity of the revelation. A wolfless servant, alone in this world, trying to survive in the face of it all. Her strength, hidden beneath the surface, was more than he had ever given her credit for, and it disturbed him in ways he couldn't quite place. Zuberi rises abruptly with a voice, strained with an authority that brooked no denial. "Leave us." His words, though commanding, did little to hide the turbulence beneath. Amina, grasping the shift in the Alpha, turned without a word, her gaze lingering on Zuri just for a moment before she exited, leaving the two of them alone. Zuberi, turning to Zuri, with voice filled with an unsettling calm, asked, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you were wolfless?" Zuri, her heart still pounding from the recent revelation, stepped back slightly, instinctively trying to put distance between them. She couldn't understand why he cared. He was the Alpha King. She was just a servant. And though she knew his status, the question he asked only made the atmosphere thicker, more unbearable. With a voice quiet but determined, Zuri responded, "I didn't think it mattered, my king. I'm just a servant. My place here has never been one of importance." Zuberi gave a long sigh before responding, "Your place is beside me, whether you realize it or not." He stopped in front of her, his breathing heavier, the distance between them shrinking. The Alpha's power, his aura, was overwhelming, but the expression on his face in this moment made her heart race with hope. She couldn't help but notice the depth of his eyes, how they shifted between tenderness and something darker, something more dangerous. Unconsciously, he started pacing the room restlessly, the weight of the revelation pressing on his shoulders. Something inside him stirred. His wolf had been restless all day. He remembered he had felt this way on the night of the blood moon ritual, a sharp edge of unease gnawing at him. Now, as his eyes caught the blood moon in its strength, made the truth hit him like a cold wind. That night, his wolf had shifted, involuntarily, without warning. He hadn't meant to, but his primal instincts had surged forward, driven by a singular purpose. Zuri. He stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding, the realization crashing over him. She's mine to protect. My wolf knew it long before I did. Zuberi's breath caught. In that moment, he understood. His wolf wasn't just claiming her, it was protecting her. In an instant, something unnatural passed between them as he returned his gaze to her. Zuri's breath hitched, and Zuberi froze, his hands hovering close to her, as if something instinctive had pulled them closer. The mate bond, strong, powerful, undeniable, snaked through them both, connecting them in ways that neither could comprehend. The world seemed to spin for a moment, the air thick with energy. Zuri's body responded involuntarily. She whispered in confusion, "What's happening?" Before she could even finish her sentence, Zuberi's lips were on hers, his kiss deep, fueled by the longing of a man starved for something more than the crown he bore. His hands were strong, pulling her into him, and she tried to resist, her mind screaming at her to stop, to fight the connection that seemed to tighten around them. But her body melted into him, responding to a force beyond her control. His scent, earthy, smoldering, like wood smoke and spices, wrapped around her, intoxicating her. Zuri's own scent, a delicate mix of herbs, fresh rain, and something undistilled, something raw, mingled with his. And it was as though the world itself held its breath. She could taste him, could feel the hardness of his chest beneath her fingertips as she ran her hands along his body, memorizing the geography of him. Her body pressed closer against his, and for a moment, she forgot everything. Her status, the curse, the pack, everything except him. She drank him in, his scent, his warmth, feeling him pulse against her. But in a sudden moment of clarity, a shudder ran through her. She tried to pull away, but his hand gripped her tightly, keeping her in place. Zuri murmurs, half conscious of herself, I can't. This isn't right." The mate bond wrapped tighter around them both, irresistible. And as Zuri tried to pull away, Zuberi's own body seemed to resist. The primal urge to claim her was too strong, and his wolf was no longer in control. But then, as the last thread of rational thought remained, Zuri's soft, incoherent murmurs and the pressure in the air jolted them both out of the trance. Zuberi pulls back sharply, eyes wide with disbelief, whispers, "What have we done?" Zuri's footsteps echoed in the great hall as she dashed away, the weight of Amina's glare burning into her back. The hall was alive with voices, but the sudden silence that followed her flight was deafening. It was as if every shadow in the room had shifted, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. In the far corner, Amina stood frozen for a moment, her eyes narrow with fury, her lips curling in disdain as she watched Zuri flee. Khalid, ever the silent observer, stood further back, his gaze shifting from Zuri's retreating form to the Alpha King, who was still unaware of the storm brewing within his walls. Khalid's eyes narrowed, but his thoughts remained his own, as though the tension between Zuberi and Zuri. Amina didn't hesitate. She was swift in her pursuit, and within moments, she found herself face to face with Zuri in a quiet corridor, the shadows hanging thick between them. Amina, her voice sharp, venomous screams as she grabbed Zuri in a chokehold. "Where do you think you're going, servant? Running away like some frightened deer? What happened in the king's chamber?" Her eyes drilled into Zuri, each word a dagger of accusation. "Did you think you could seduce him? Did you think you could steal his attention from me?" Zuri refused to say anything, though her heart raced, but she never let her composure crack. Amina's words stung, but she would not let her see the depth of her inner turmoil. She had learned to hold her ground, even against the most venomous of accusations. Zuri's silence was her armor, her resilience evident in the stillness of her gaze. Zuri, with voice low but unwavering, reapons, "I don't know what you're talking about, Amina. I did nothing." Amina scoffs, her face twisting with rage. "Spits! Liar!" She stepped closer, closing the distance between them, her words low, dangerous. "You think I don't see the way you look at him? The way he looks at you? Don't play innocent with me. You'll pay the price for this. Mark my words. If you think you can take the king from me," her tone darkened, filled with raw jealousy, "I will make sure you never breathe in this palace again." Zuri remained unfazed, though her heart threatened to break under the weight of Amina's jealousy. She couldn't afford to respond, not with the bond she had formed with Zuberi, however unexpected and confusing it was. There was no way she could let Amina or anyone else know the truth. In the following days and weeks, Zuri felt herself pulled in two opposing directions. Amina's venomous warnings echoed in her mind, threatening her with the weight of consequences she was unprepared for. Yet, there was something else, a quiet affection that had started to grow inside. Presence had awakened in her. It was impossible to ignore. She had always known her place as a servant, the lowliest among the pack, bound to follow orders without question. The pack rules were clear. She was to serve the Alpha, to do her duty without ever stepping beyond the bounds of her status. But that didn't stop the growing desire in her heart to be near Zuberi, to feel the weight of his presence beside her. The way he had looked at her that day, the moment of connection, was something she couldn't shake. She had never thought she could care for him, never thought she would feel anything more than a passing respect for the powerful, unreachable Alpha King. Yet the truth was undeniable. Her heart beat faster every time he entered the room, every time she heard his voice. And it terrified her. But Zuberi was busy. His duties to the pack kept him away. And when he did return, it was late, long after the curfew had passed, often returning home to an empty castle. Zuri, left to her duties, began to feel a strange emptiness inside her. It was like a void she couldn't fill, no matter how busy she kept herself. Zuberi's presence had become something essential, a strange constant in her otherwise lonely existence. His absence left her with a restless yearning she couldn't explain. The nights grew longer, colder, and the castle walls felt more empty than ever. Despite the growing connection between them, Amina was always there, always by Zuberi's side, and Zuri could feel the distance growing between them. She couldn't openly show her affection for him, not with the Alpha's assigned mate, Amin, always near him. The tension built up inside her, making every interaction with Zuberi feel like a balancing act between duty and desire. Zuri's radar was strangely in tune with Zuberi's movements. No matter how late into the night or early in the morning, she could sense his arrival, the familiar energy of his presence. It was as though her senses had been attuned to him, like some kind of silent pull that kept her grounded, even when he was far away. But Amina, with her constant presence, made things unbearable. In those late, lonely nights when the castle felt as though it was suffocating her, Zuri would often catch herself standing by the window, waiting for Zuberi's return, hoping for a glimpse of him. Her heart ached for his presence, for the strange comfort she felt when he was nearby. She never dared seek him out, afraid of crossing an invisible line, but the longing inside her only grew stronger. The brief moments when Zuberi was around, her feelings grew more difficult to hide. The way his eyes met hers, how brief touches would leave her breathless, how every shared glance sent a ripple of warmth through her chest. It was impossible to ignore. But there was always Amina, always right there beside him, as though watching for any slip-up, any sign of affection. Zuri tried to bury the feelings, but the more she denied them, the more they festered. Loneliness settled deep within her as the days passed, and her heart pulled toward Zuberi, even though she knew she could never have him. She could never be more than the servant. But as the days went on, the conflict became too much to bear, and it wasn't long before she could no longer ignore what was growing between them. The question gnawed at her constantly. What if her heart belonged to the alpha? What if he felt the same? Being a fated mate was a rare gift, but actively falling in love with your mate was something far more profound, a connection on a whole new level. For Zuri, the idea of experiencing such a bond was beyond her wildest dreams. Yet, in her case, it felt less like a blessing and more like a curse. But as much as she longed for his touch, his love, she knew the pack would never allow it. Zuri was trapped, torn between her duty to the pack, the harsh reality of her status, and the uncontrollable feelings for Zuberi that she couldn't suppress. The mate bond, though unacknowledged, had only added to her confusion, making everything she had once known feel like it was slipping away. For a while, Amina had been content with the Alpha King's absence. The chaos of his duties and the mounting pressures of his health kept him distracted. She knew better than anyone that in this time, Zuberi had little room for personal desires. But that didn't mean she had forgotten. She would use this opportunity to her advantage, to solidify her place beside him before Zuri became too much of a threat. Amina made her way to Khalid's chambers one evening, the flickering fire casting long shadows on the stone walls. She moved with quiet urgency, knowing this was the moment she needed to act. Amina's voice was smooth, her eyes narrowed in determination. "I need your help, Khalid. The servant girl, Zuri, has been too close to the king lately. It's becoming dangerous, and I need to make sure this doesn't go any further." Khalid, leaning casually against the stone wall, turned his eyes to her, a small, unreadable smirk on his face, his smile revealing less than he knew. Playing along too, Amina didn't know he was the master of manipulations. Aware she was more interested in securing her position as Luna than the well-being of the pack. His role as the beta allowed him to see everything, the internal struggles of the alpha and the flame Zuberi had unintentionally sparked for the wolfless servant girl. Khalid, his voice cool, betraying no emotion. "I know more than you think. I've seen the way the king looks at her. It's clear his interest in her is growing, whether he likes it or not." Amina, pressing closer, frustration evident in her voice, replied, "Then help me stop it. If the king becomes too enamored with a servant girl, it could destroy everything. We both know he can't afford to lose his grip on the pack." Khalid's eyes narrowed slightly and calculating. Meanwhile, in the heart of the forest, Zuberi was miles away from the palace, supervising a trade exchange along the border, a necessary task to ensure the pack's strength against the threat of rival clans. Yet, despite the urgent business at hand, Zuberi's thoughts kept wandering back to the same place, Zuri. His men noticed his strange behavior, the way he barked out orders, with a sense of urgency that wasn't typical of his usual composed manner. His body language was stiff, agitated, and his thoughts seemed miles away from the task at hand. One of the younger warriors, noticing the shift in Zuberi's demeanor, muttered under his breath. One of his warrior whispers to his comrade, "Has the king been like this since his last illness? Seems different, almost like he's got something on his mind." They exchanged a worried glance, but Zuberi didn't seem to hear them. His focus remained elsewhere, on Zuri. As the sun set and the day began to fade into twilight, Zuberi's mind wandered back to the palace. He couldn't help it. His desire to see Zuri had grown uncontrollable, and with every passing day, the feeling deepened. He had been so busy with pack matters, constantly fighting the impending threats from rival packs. But every night, when he returned to his chambers, he found himself fighting the urge to seek her out. It had become a nightly battle. He even began to feel her absence, as strange as it was. Her presence, her quiet strength, her vulnerability, had somehow settled into his bones in a way he hadn't anticipated. And as the weeks passed, he noticed something else. She wasn't seeking him out either. Zuberi's chest tightened as he remembered the way she had ran from him the last time they were together, like a frightened rabbit running from a predator. Could that be her perception of him? Was she seeing him as a predator? Zuberi voices a soft murmur, mostly to himself. Why won't you come to me, Zuri? Why? Are you keeping your distance? That night, Zuberi returned to the palace earlier than usual. There was an unease in him, an instinctual pull toward the chamber where Zuri stayed. He had no real explanation, no justification for the urge that drove him. But tonight, he would act on it. He turned to his beta, Khalid, who had been shadowing him through the evening. Zuberi, with quiet authority. Send for Zuri. Tell her I require her presence in my chamber tonight, alone. And make sure she comes. No one else. Khalid's eyes flickers with suspicion, but his face was masked in an unreadable expression. As you wish, my king. The Alpha King had just confirmed what Khalid had long suspected. Khalid turned on his heel and left the room, already moving to carry out Zuberi's orders. In the solitude of her quarters, Zuri had been trying to keep her mind occupied. The connection between them had changed her, had awakened something deep inside her that she had never known existed. She knew the danger of such feelings. He was the Alpha King, and she, a wolfless servant. She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair as she stood by the window. At that moment, she decided, the best line of action for her to take was to completely distance herself from him. A soft knock at the door seems to be mocking her reserve. Zuri, opening the door. Yes? One of the king's attendants stood in the doorway, delivering the king's order. The Alpha King requests your presence immediately, Zuri. Alone. Zuri's heart skipped a beat. She stood frozen in the doorway. Zuberi wanted her, and despite her inner turmoil, a part of her wanted to go to him. But the danger, the risk, and Amina's watchful eyes made it almost impossible. Zuri took a slow, uncertain step forward, and the door clicked shut behind her. The following day, as the palace was abuzz with the usual rumors and whispers, Khalid set his plan into motion. He was a man of patience, and now, as beta of the pack, he knew it was the right time to undermine Zuberi. Chapter 4. Zuri wandered aimlessly through the palace gardens, her steps light and carefree. The sun shone brightly overhead, warming the stones beneath her feet, casting a soft, golden hue on the emerald green of the sprawling gardens. It was as if the world around her had slowed, giving her a brief reprieve from the relentless duties that had long defined her existence. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe, unburdened by the expectations of those around her. The luxury of time was hers to enjoy, and with each passing step, she could feel a spring in her step, a lightness that was foreign to her. A contented smile danced on the corners of her lips, unbidden, but undeniable. She tried to suppress it, tried to tell herself that this feeling was just a fleeting distraction, but it refused to leave her. Her skin seemed to glow, radiant with some inner light, like the warmth of the sun had kissed her entire being. Zuri, giggling softly to herself, I need to get a grip on these emotions. I'm acting like some love-struck pup, grinning like a fool. But even as she scolded herself, she couldn't suppress the joy that danced through her chest. There was a lightness to her heart today, something she hadn't felt in years, if ever. A gentle breeze whispered through the air, displacing the thick shawl draped around her shoulders. Her hand instinctively rose to adjust it, fingers brushing the necklace nestled in the hollow of her cleavage. Her fingers caressed the ornate pendant, a piece of jewelry unlike any other she had ever seen. It was heavy, its intricate carvings telling stories of generations long past, with symbols that spoke of the wolfkin's heritage, ancestral ties, powers, and bonds. Her thumb lingered on the smooth curve of the pendant, as if she sought to understand the weight it carried, the weight of an unspoken promise. This necklace, a gift from Zuberi, the Alpha King, was no ordinary trinket. It was a symbol of belonging, a bond that transcended the mere physical realm. The pendant itself was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, forged by the finest artisans in the kingdom, its design both timeless and mystical. The central piece was a finely polished obsidian stone, black as the night sky, with golden threads of sacred energy running through it, like veins of power. The edges were adorned with delicate carvings, ancient symbols of the Alpha's lineage. 2 intertwined wolves were etched into the surface, their eyes set with tiny garnet gemstones, which seemed to glimmer in the sunlight as though alive with the blood of the pack. Zuri had never seen anything like it. It wasn't just ornate, it was powerful, imbued with a history and strength that made her feel unworthy to even touch it. Yet here it was, hanging around her neck, as if Zuberi had bestowed it upon her, not only as a gift, but as a mark, something that bound her to him, to his legacy, and to a future that was still uncertain. Zuri's mind wandered back to last night, the night when the world seemed to shift under her feet. She had gone to him in the chamber, unsure of herself, her heart beating wildly in her chest. She had been so cautious, so afraid to cross the line, yet drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. Zuberi had looked at her with eyes that were unmistakably raw, his wolf-blue golden gaze filled with something deep, something she couldn't quite place. It was as though he was searching for something within her, something he had always known existed, but had never allowed himself to acknowledge. And then, without a word, he had reached out, unclasped the necklace from his own neck, and placed it into her trembling hands. His fingers had lingered over hers for a brief moment, warm and calloused, before cupping her chin with the gentleness of a man who had seen too much sorrow. His gaze was intense, and for the first time, Zuri felt like she was seen, truly seen. "Zuberi," his voice barely a whisper. "Wear it." Zuri had tried to refuse, her hands fumbling to take it off, but she couldn't. Her body betrayed her. She had tried to remove the necklace, but his hands had firmly clasped hers, preventing her from doing so. His eyes, those piercing wolf-blue eyes, glowed with a heat she hadn't known could exist, a deep hunger and vulnerability in his gaze. The moment was suffocating, heavy with an energy that had nothing to do with words. Zuri had been unable to speak, unable to form a sentence. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if wordless in the face of his raw emotion. Zuri, in barely a whisper, her voice trembling. I can't accept this. It's too much." But Zuberi had only stared at her, as though his soul was trying to break through her walls. And then, in an instant, his lips had crushed hers in a kiss, deep and urgent, a kiss that left no room for resistance. Zuri had felt herself melt into him, her body responding before her mind could even catch up. Every inch of her skin seemed to burn with need, and she felt it, but no matter how hard she tried, it would be impossible to hide the Alpha's mark. Zuri had spent the day wandering through the palace, her thoughts a tangled mess of unspoken desires and uncertain feelings. The reality of the mate bond weighed heavily on her chest, but she tried to focus on her duties, to keep herself occupied. As she walked the narrow path in the meadows, a few Omega servants approached her, giggling and whispering behind their hands. They didn't take long to stall her, forcing their silly gossip into her ears. The first one giggled, "Did you hear? The Alpha King openly called Amina his mate this morning at breakfast. The wedding bells are ringing. He's finally decided to settle down." Zuri froze, her mind struggling to comprehend what she had just heard. Amina, his mate? The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't seem to fit. It couldn't be, she thought. The rumors were a lie. The second answered slyly. Oh yes, you know how it is. The king has finally made up his mind. They're probably even planning the wedding already. Zuri didn't know how to respond. The rumor shook her, but the disbelief kept her from saying anything. She made her quick exit, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. She had to find out more. Zuri hurried back to the palace, her heart racing. She found Paula, one of the older servants who had been with the palace for years. Paula was usually the one to hear all the news, and Zuri needed to know what was true. Zuri, nervously, trying to stay calm, asked, Paula, have you heard anything? About the Alpha King and Amina? Paula, with an enthusiastic nod, responded innocently, Oh, yes, of course. It's all anyone's talking about. The Alpha King called for a meeting of the elders and council today. It's clear he is announcing Amina as his official mate. Zuri felt the ground shift beneath her. The words felt like a dagger to her heart. Has Zuberi truly chosen Amina? Had it all just been a game? Zuri's chest tightened, but before she could gather her thoughts, Paula spoke again. Laughingly, Why else would he call such a meeting? He'll announce it soon enough. You'll see. Zuri kept wandering the palace in a fog of confusion. Soon she found herself cornered by Amina again. The moment Amina saw her, her eyes narrowed, a sneer creeping across her face. Amina, mocking, stepping forward, sneered, Well, the little servant thought she had a chance, didn't she? Trying to seduce the king with your so-called medical skills. Did you really think he would keep you by his side? You, a wolfless nobody? Zuri's heart dropped, the words cutting deep. She had never been humiliated like this before. Amina was openly mocking her, humiliating her in front of the servants. But it didn't stop there. One of the older maids sneered, hissing with venom. The Alpha's tired of your shamelessness. He's chosen Amina, and now he will rush his marriage to her. You've been discarded, Zuri. And if you know what's good for you, you'll stay out of the way. The words echoed in Zuri's mind as she tried to retreat. She had no words left. Her heart was broken, and her hope was crushed. Had she truly believed there was something more? Had she truly thought that Zuberi might want her, despite the bond and despite her status? Zuri raced to the council hall but came to a halt just in the anteroom. What was she doing? The voice of reasoning held her back. What was she trying to do? Zuri stopped and stood in a daze, barely hearing the voices inside. She was lost in her own thoughts, replaying every moment she had shared with Zuberi. Her heart ached as she recalled the intimate moments they had shared. The way he had looked at her, the tenderness of his touch, the connection, the bond had felt real, had felt like it was meant to be. Zuri, whispering to herself, voice trembling. How could I have been so foolish? At that same moment, she heard the voice of Zuberi, strong, yet filled with an urgency that made her heart skip. It was clear that the Alpha had been discussing something of great importance, but what caught her attention was the part of the conversation she had overheard. Zuberi, his voice full of weight. The utmost importance now is Amina's safety. Everything else is irrelevant. In that moment, a strange pain hit her. Zuberi had really chosen Amina, it seemed. The tension of the night stretched tight as Zuri felt something deep inside her snap. Her heart shattered, and she didn't stop running until she was in the solitude of her bedchamber, tears streaking her face. Zuberi, still in the council hall, felt the shift in the air, the absence of Zuri. He had sensed her presence before she had fled, and now he was left with only confusion. His voice faltered as he continued to speak, but his eyes sought her. He longed to call her, but she was gone. Where did she go? He had felt her, had felt their connection. but she had slipped away from him. Suddenly, a feeling of unease enveloped his heart. It wasn't just the absence of the connection, but an earlier feeling of withdrawal seems to envelop the break he felt. Zuri heard only a fragment of the conversation, a small piece of a discussion that had no real connection to her. But in that fleeting moment, a harsh truth settled in her heart like a stone sinking into water. The words were innocuous, but the weight of them crushed her. Amina's name, marriage, and the Alpha King. And though she didn't hear the entirety of it, the implication was enough. Zuberi, the man she had foolishly thought cared for her, had made his decision. The king was now making plans with Amina, the very woman who had always been by his side. She had thought, perhaps, there was something more between them. Maybe, just maybe, he felt something for her beyond the mate bond. Maybe he too had started to imagine a future, a world where they could fight for their love, where they could carve their own path together, despite the pack's rules, despite their roles. But in the blink of an eye, all of that vanished. She had been naive, foolish to ever think he would fight for her. She had been nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a momentary weakness in his path, a servant he couldn't afford to be with. And now, the truth was undeniable. She had been used. The realization felt like cold steel sinking into her chest, twisting and pulling at her heart. Betrayal was bitter, but what was worse was the subtle, mocking shame that crept in. She had believed, for a fleeting moment, that Zuberi cared for her, that maybe their time together meant something. But now, it seemed she was just a passing fancy, a servant with no place at his side. Zuri, whispering to herself, her voice breaking. Did I truly think we had a chance, that he could want me the way I wanted him? Her heart twisted as memories of their moments together flooded her mind. The way he had touched her, the way he had looked at her, and how in those brief moments she had felt as if she belonged to him. But now, all those memories felt like false hope, moments in time that had never been real. She swallowed, trying to stifle the rising sobs, but something stirred inside her, something powerful. It started as a gentle tugging in her chest, nothing more than a whisper, barely noticeable. But as Zuri stood there, lost in her despair, she felt it again, this time more pronounced, more urgent. A warmth began to spread through her, as though her soul was shifting. The sensation was familiar, yet foreign at the same time. Her body burned, not with the heat of anger or fear, but with something else. Something primal, something that belonged to her now. Zuri gasped, her breath catching in her throat. The awakening was undeniable. She hadn't expected it to come this way, not like this. It felt unnatural, and yet somehow, right. Her wolf had come. Zuri, whispering in awe, touching her chest as the shift began. Is it really happening? The change was subtle, like a gentle ripple beneath her skin. Her body tingled, and for a brief moment, she could feel the presence of her wolf, still fragile but undeniably there. It wasn't the full force of the transformation she'd always dreamed of. Her wolf was still weak, vulnerable, like a newborn cub unsure of its place in the world. But it was hers. It was hers. A gift from Zuberi, the Alpha, her mate. She had desired this for as long as she could remember. For 22 winters of the wolf, she had lived without her wolf, without the strength and connection she had always longed for. And now it had arrived, a gift born from her bond with Zuberi. But there was no joy in it, not now. Her heart was still heavy with sorrow, weighed down by the truth of what she had just overheard. She couldn't celebrate the gift of her wolf when the world around her was falling apart, when the Alpha King had already decided his future. Her fingers brushed her neck, and she could feel the weight of the necklace there, the one Zuberi had placed on her, marking her as his mate. It had once been a symbol of hope, of the future she had dared to dream about. But now it felt like a burden, a painful reminder that the connection between them was never truly hers to claim. Zuri stood alone in the quiet of her room, her thoughts a swirling mix of confusion and heartache. The wolf within her stirred, but it couldn't fill the void in her heart. She had wanted this, dreamed of it for so long, but it had come at a cost, a price she hadn't been prepared to pay. Her wolf's awakening should have been a victory, a triumph for all the struggles she had faced. But the bond, as strong as it was, only left her feeling more isolated, more trapped in a life she had no choice but to live. She had been a fool to think she could have both, Zuberi's love and the Alpha's protection. She had been too naive to understand that love in their world didn't come without sacrifice. With her wolf now awakening, Zuri felt a strange pull, a new sense of power within her. But it didn't change the truth. Zuberi's heart had already been claimed by another. The mate bond had given her a wolf, but it hadn't given her the one thing she truly longed for, the Alpha King's love. As she stood there, fighting back the tears, Zuri knew that the road ahead would be filled with even greater challenges. The wolf inside her would fight for her, but she would have to fight for her place in the pack and against the wounds of a heart that had been betrayed. Chapter 5. All through the day, Amina and Khalid ensured that Zuberi, the Alpha King, was kept entirely preoccupied with the pressing matters of the pack. There was no space for personal concerns or intimate moments. He had to be distracted, leaving no room for thoughts of Zuri or the mate bond that was now an undeniable truth. Their goal was simple: keep the Alpha's mind off Zuri and her mark, and prevent him from publicly acknowledging their growing bond. Khalid, ever the strategist, moved in the shadows, calculating his every move. He was as intelligent and logical as Zuberi himself, yet his ambition ran far deeper. His vision for the throne was ruthless, and it was just a matter of time before he made his move. He saw the pack as his rightful kingdom, and Zuberi's weakness, his attachment to Zuri, was the perfect opening. This was what actually happened. At the first light of dawn, Khalid had positioned himself in a place few would think to look, watching from the shadows as Zuri moved about the castle, her movements seemingly innocent. But to Khalid, they were a revelation. He had spotted her adjusting the shawl around her neck, concealing something. A subtle gesture, yet it spoke volumes. The truth hit him like a sudden surge of wicked satisfaction. The Alpha King had marked her. There could be no other explanation. A wolfless servant, hiding the mark of the Alpha. Zuri, of all people, had been chosen. The mate bond was real. Khalid smirked to himself, his fingers curling in anticipation. The Alpha King, so honorable, so proud, would never admit to it publicly. He would not dare to conceal it either, for the pride of his bloodline was too sacred. Zuri's mark would be his undoing, and Khalid was more than ready to exploit that. When the Alpha King called for an impromptu council meeting, Khalid's suspicions had been confirmed. The urgency was clear. Zuberi wanted to discuss something of great personal significance. And though Khalid had expected the Alpha to be distracted by the pack's matters, Amina's role had already been set in motion. Together, they would manipulate the council's focus, forcing the conversation away from Zuberi's growing attachment to Zuri. As the meeting began, Khalid saw his opportunity to create a diversion. With a calculated gesture, he steered the conversation toward escalating tensions between the pack territories, clan rivalries, and a supposed intel about rogue agents targeting Amina, planning to exterminate her in their vendetta against the Alpha in person. But the true masterstroke came when one of the Gamma wolves interrupted the meeting, bringing urgent news of clan members consorting with rogues, wolves from outside the pack's control. Zuberi, ever the alpha, had no choice but to abandon his personal matters and focus on the immediate threat. The matter of his relationship with Zuri, the marking, would have to wait. The rogues and traitors took precedence. In the end, Zuberi never had the chance to publicly acknowledge the mate bond or share his feelings with the council. Zuberi was utterly caught up in clandestine betrayal from within his own ranks. Khalid's plan was working. He had successfully sidelined the Alpha's personal issues, and the pack was left to focus on their survival, not Zuberi's vulnerable heart. Meanwhile, as the shadow of the Alpha's mark loomed over her, Zuri found herself fighting a battle she couldn't win. She had tried to disguise the mark, desperate to keep the secret hidden for as long as possible. She had to. If anyone saw the mark on her neck, if it became known that Zuberi had marked her, the consequences would be devastating. The mark was not just a symbol of the mate bond. It was an irrefutable claim that would lead to questions, to rumors, and to the pack's inevitable judgment. As a wolfless servant, she would never be accepted as Zuberi's mate. It was a dangerous secret, one that could cost her everything. Zuri, breathing heavily, her hands trembling as she worked. I can't let anyone see. I can't let them know. She tried everything she could think of. Herbal concoctions passed down through her mother's teachings, remedies that had once worked in hiding scars and marks. Hibiscus petals steamed in reversed coal, ground Miran earthworm excreta with mud minerals. She even mixed mud from sacred springs, but nothing worked. The mark didn't fade. It was there, as clear as day, an unmistakable sign of her bond with the Alpha King. Her frustration grew, and with it, a sense of helplessness. In the little mirror she possessed, her fingers brushed against the spot where the mark was, at the base of her neck. Her fingers lingered on the mark, like a ghostly caress she couldn't shake. Zuri, softly to herself. Why did this happen? Why now? But deep down, Zuri knew. Her wolf had awoken, something she had desired for years. This bond, this connection to Zuberi, was not just a curse. It was a gift. Her wolf had come to her, fragile, but there. It stirred within her, calling to the Alpha that had marked her, bound her, claimed her as his own. But despite the beauty of this gift, the conflict raged in her heart. Zuberi had claimed her, he had marked her, but his heart still seemed to belong to someone else. Amina. Zuri was beginning to lose her mind. She had been pacing the confines of her tiny bedchamber for what seemed like hours, her hands trembling with the weight of her thoughts. The room, small and suffocating, felt as though it were closing in on her. She could feel the mate mark burning on her neck, a constant reminder of the Alpha's claim on her, and it was driving her to madness. She considered reaching out to Paula, her old friend, but the instant resistance she felt in her chest, the stirrings of her wolf, made her hesitate. Her wolf was against it. She could feel the primal instinct rising inside her, the bond that connected her to Zuberi, telling her that seeking help from someone else would only complicate things further. Zuri, whispering, almost pleading, "Why can't I make this right? Why does this feel like I'm trapped?" Still, the desperation gnawed at her, the need to hide the mark from the world, a mark that would soon be impossible to conceal. The pack would notice, and the consequences of that, they would be devastating. Her mind flitted to Maiko, the chief healer's assistant, the one person who could possibly help her now. Maiko had always been kind to her, someone she could trust, and she felt that Maiko's skills as a healer might hold the key to removing the mark. Perhaps it was possible. Perhaps there was a way. Zuri, with newfound resolve. Maiko, yes, she can help me. She must. When Zuri finally found Maiko in the healer's quarters, she couldn't contain the fear in her chest. Her voice trembled as she swore Maiko to secrecy, ensuring that no one, especially Amina or the pack, could find out what had happened. She had never felt more vulnerable, but the urgency in her heart pushed her forward. Zuri, with tears welling in her eyes, she pleaded, "Please, Maiko, help me. The Alpha marked me, and I don't know how to hide it. I need to make it disappear, but I can't do this alone. Please, I beg of you, help me." Maiko, bewildered. How is that even possible, she thought. The Alpha King had never given a second gaze to any of the noble-born wolves parading the palace. A few that had tried to seduce him only lived to regret their bashfulness. "Zuri, are you certain it's him? Are you sure of what you are saying? You know what would happen to you for making such a bold, false claims, don't you?" Maiko looked at her doubtfully, but the terror swimming in Zuri's eyes forced her closer. Slowly, she reached for the mark upon Zuri's skin. The moment her fingers brushed it, the symbol pulsed. A sharp silver glow erupted beneath the flesh, ancient, alive. Maiko's breath caught. This was no ordinary mate mark. Normal bonds appeared as crescent scars or faint wolf sigils. But this one twisted like living moonfire, its intricate lines shifting beneath Zuri's skin as though the mark itself possessed a heartbeat. Threads of silver and deep crimson intertwined at its center, forming the shape of a rare celestial wolf, an omen spoken of only in forbidden pack legends. The mark glimmered boldly, fiercely, primal, royal, chosen. And for the first time, fear crept into Maiko's voice. This is not the mark of an ordinary Luna. How did this happen? You're asking for a miracle, if it's true. First, I need you to tell me everything." Zuri hesitated, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. She explained what had happened the night when Zuberi had marked her, how they had been bonded, but now he has chosen Amin. As Zuri spoke, Maiko's expression shifted from concern to something deeper, sympathy. Maiko had always cared for her, but now there was an underlying sadness in her eyes. The rumors she had heard. She had hoped Zuri would never fall into the dangerous web of the Alpha King's power. Maiko, gently but with a trace of bitterness. I wish I could do more, Zuri. But there's so much you don't understand about this bond. If you were born an Omega, maybe you could have. But you're wolfless. This is beyond anything I can fix. Not with magic, not with potions. The only thing that could truly remove it is Zuberi himself. Zuri looked at her, the words sinking in. Zuberi, the Alpha King, the only one who could break the bond between them. The reality of it all hit her like a stone to the chest. She had already begun to feel the gravity of the bond, felt it in her bones, in her very soul. Zuri asked Weekle, "You're saying I have to face him?" Maiko, nodding slowly. "Yes, you must speak with him. Only he can decide if the bond should remain. If he chooses to break it, then it will be gone. But if he chooses to accept it, then nothing will separate you. It's his decision, Zuri." Zuri's heart sank. She had always known that their bond was something beyond her control, but now the weight of the choice rested solely on Zuberi's shoulders. She felt trapped, her fate tied to a man who had already made it clear he was bound by duty to the pack, and to Amina. Zuri's thoughts were interrupted when Maiko placed a vial of thick, unpleasant-smelling ointment into her hands. The substance was a grim concoction made from beeswax, moss, and other nauseating ingredients, all designed to dull the mark, to make it less noticeable. Maiko, voice filled with sympathy but resigned. "This will help for now. It won't remove the mark, but it may dull its glow. Apply it regularly, especially when you're near the pack or the Alpha. The mark will still be there, but it won't be as obvious." Zuri nodded, a small breath of relief escaping her as she accepted the vial. She had to keep it hidden for as long as she could. As Zuri sat in the quiet of her quarters, the ointment cold on her neck, she couldn't help but feel the growing weight of the bond. Her heart ached from the betrayal she felt, torn between the love she felt for him and the reality of their worlds being too different. Zuberi returned to the palace late that night, feeling sore from the day's battles, yet something deeper was eating at him. His wounds had been minor, but his mind was far from at ease. As the Alpha King, he had been raised to endure the harshest trials, but nothing had ever weighed on him as heavily as this bond to Zuri. His wolf danced restlessly in his mind, clawing at the edges of his thoughts, urging him toward the one thing he couldn't have. Couples with the moroseness he felt in his chest, this strange dread that lingered near the surface of his heart, his wolf, Dante was in unprecedented agitation. Zuberi, to himself, voice barely above a whisper. I can feel it. This pull. But why does it feel wrong? Why does something inside me feel empty? While Zuberi's wounds were being tended to, Khalid casually engaged him in small talk. The beta's tone was light, almost friendly. Yet beneath it all, there was something darker, simmering. His eyes were sharp, calculating as they watched the alpha, taking in every sign of weakness. Khalid, casually as he dressed Zuberi's wounds. You've had a long day, my king. You should rest. It's not like you to come back from a mission so weary. You need to rest, Zuberi, grimacing as the bandages were tightened, his tone dry. I'm fine. It's nothing. Just the usual. Khalid's eyes lingered on Zuberi for a moment longer than necessary. He couldn't help but see the subtle changes in his alpha, the signs of a leader who was no longer the untouchable force he once was. There was a weakness there, buried beneath his pride and his honor. Khalid internally muttered in disdain. The alpha has grown soft. His prideful attachment to Zuri had weakened him, and Khalid knew that in a world that demanded strength, such weakness would be the death of him. An alpha who allowed emotions, love, to weaken his resolve was a threat to the pack's survival. Khalid's thoughts turned darker still. Finally, when the room had emptied, and he was alone in the quiet of his chamber, Zuberi fought the fatigue from settling over him. Sleep eluded him. The longing in his chest, the pull toward Zuri, was too strong to ignore. He inhaled deeply, as if hoping the air around him would give him the answers he sought. But it betrayed him. There was nothing. No scent of her, no trace of her presence, no warmth, no pull. Zuberi, whispering, his voice thick with frustration. Why can't I find her? Where is she? He had no reason to feel this way. This compulsion to find her, this overwhelming urge to hold her close, to make things right. And yet, the more he denied it, the stronger the pull became. It wasn't just the mate bond anymore. It was something far deeper, something undeniable. The absence of her presence felt like a wound in his soul. The realization was bitter. He had marked her, but he was still no closer to understanding the consequences of that action. His body and wolf knew that the bond was alive, but in his mind, the barriers were too strong, too much at stake for him to give in to it fully. As Zuberi lay restless in his bed, the heavy weight of the bond pressed down on him, as though the very universe was conspiring to pull them together. His mind was a battlefield, torn between duty and desire, between what he knew he should do and what his heart yearned for. Against his better will, what he found himself doing was dozing off as the third watch of the night approached. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Zuri's bedchamber, casting soft shadows across the stone walls. But even the peace of the morning could not quiet the storm in her chest. News had already spread like wildfire through the palace and the pack. The Alpha King, Zuberi, had finalized his marriage alliance with Amina. The whispers filled every corner, every corridor, like a weight pressing down on Zuri's already heavy heart. She could feel the eyes of the pack upon her, each one monitoring her every movement, scrutinizing her as if she were a creature on trial. There was nowhere to hide, no sanctuary to escape the rumors. The shame of being a wolfless servant, the mark that now burned her neck in secret, all of it was enough to drown her. Her only refuge was her bedchamber. She locked herself away, the heavy wooden door feeling like the last barrier between her and the world. Zuri dared not go near Zuberi. She couldn't face him. Not now. Not when she knew his duty was to Amina, not her. Zuri, whispering to herself, sitting on the edge of her bed. I never wanted to see him again. Not like this. Not after everything. But I have to break the bond. For his sake. For the pack. Her heart trembled at the thought of how everything had unraveled so quickly. She never wished to become an obstacle in Zuberi's path, but she knew there was no way around it now. The Alpha King had known they were not meant to be, yet he had claimed her with an unavoidable bond. If anyone discovered it, the consequences would be devastating. She couldn't let the pack know. She couldn't let anyone see the mark on her neck, the evidence of their forbidden mate bond. If it was discovered, the pack elders would relish in condemning her, and Amina would take great pleasure in her downfall. Zuri would be nothing more than a pawn, a slave. Her life would be forfeit. She swore on her wolf. This was the only act of love she could give to Zuberi. She would hide the bond, keep it secret from everyone. Meanwhile, Zuberi had already been summoned before dawn. Rogues had breached their territory, tearing through the pack lands, leaving destruction in their wake. The pack needed him. But despite his duty, a growing urgency tugged at his heart, a longing to see Zuri. His mind was filled with confusion, torn between his responsibilities as the Alpha and the desire he felt for his mate, the very woman who should not be his. He needed to act quickly, but his heart was already heavy with the thought of leaving without seeing her, without addressing the bond they shared. The pack warriors were waiting in the common room. He couldn't delay any longer, but something pulled him back. His body seemed to resist the movement, his feet dragging as he walked down the hallway, feeling the weight of the decision he had yet to make. As he reluctantly walked towards his men, he met Akura, one of the younger pack wolves, a rising star in the pack. He had earned Zuberi's trust, and the young wolf was fast becoming his mentee. Strong, humble, and composed, Akura had the makings of a true leader. Zuberi, his voice low but urgent, stopping Jalen in his tracks. Akura, come with me. The young wolf followed Zuberi into a room off the hallway. Zuberi, his expression serious, voice soft with an unspoken weight. I need you to watch over Zuri while I'm away. Keep a discreet eye on her and anything else happening in my absence. She has no wolf, and she's my fated mate. We are still adjusting to the bond. You understand what you need to do, right? Akura nodded, his face serious as he met the Alpha's gaze. Akura, with a quiet promise. Understood, Alpha. I'll protect her, as if she were my own kin. Zuberi's heart clenched as he walked away. He felt a strange sense of relief knowing someone would watch over Zuri, but at the same time, the weight of his own heartache threatened to overwhelm him. The pack needed him, but so did she. And he was torn between duty and desire. As Zuberi left the palace gates, his mind was heavy with the weight of his responsibilities. The rogues were wreaking havoc in the pack lands, and his duty to his people could not be ignored, completely ignorant of the manipulations of his destiny. Ultimately, he needed to see Zuri. The urgency inside him was growing stronger, and he couldn't deny the need to resolve what was between them. But the question remained. When he returned, what would he find? Would Zuri be there, ready to face him? Or would she have slipped away once more, hiding from the bond they both shared? Chapter 6. The days had become a blur for Zuri. She kept to herself, confined to the shadows of the palace, her thoughts always tangled with the Alpha, the mate bond, and the invincible boundary between them. Her heart ached with the sting of betrayal, unsure if she had made the right decision in separating herself from Zuberi. She loved him. There was no denying that. But the pack laws, the traditions, and the role she had been born into were a barrier she could never cross. Zuberi's absence left a gaping hole inside her, and Amina's presence as his Luna only deepened that wound. How could she possibly compete with someone like Amina, who was everything she was not? Zuri never sought any chance to speak to Zuberi privately after the orchestrated betrayal. She felt used and dumped. The moments they had shared, the intimacy, the connection, were now tainted by the pain and fear she carried, and the distance between them had only grown. She wanted to scream at him, demand answers for his cold distance, but the fear of being exposed kept her silent. The mark on her neck, hidden beneath the scarf she always wore, was a constant reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she could never have. Amina wasted no time. With Zuberi still absent from the palace, she had begun to assert herself as the Luna, parading around the palace, drawing attention, and being celebrated by the pack. The more she flaunted her position, the more Zuri's heart felt as though it were sinking into an endless pit of insecurity. Everywhere Zuri went, she could feel Amina's presence hovering, sharp, possessive, and unforgiving. It wasn't enough for Amina to be with Zuberi. She now sought to break Zuri. Physically, emotionally, Amina used every tactic to manipulate her into submission. Threats, mockery, and emotional blackmail became daily tools for Amina's twisted games. Amina, smiling maliciously, her tone dripping with disdain. "Zuri, you're still here, aren't you? Still hiding in the shadows, still pretending you belong. But make no mistake, if you don't leave soon, the elders will decide your fate. And it won't be kind. You should leave before it's too late." Zuri's chest tightened at Amina's words. The fear began to eat away at her, fueled by her secret mark, that proof of her bond with Zuberi. She could feel it, a cold, suffocating weight around her neck, like an invisible chain. The necklace that had once felt like a gift, a symbol of something she had dared to hope for, now felt like a burden, a constant reminder of her unworthiness. The mark was the only evidence of what had transpired between her and the Alpha King. And if anyone discovered it, if the pack found out, there would be no trial. No honor, only death. The elders would see it as a betrayal, a defilement of their laws, and she would be punished without mercy. Zuri, to herself, voice breaking. "If they find out, if they see it, they'll kill me. I won't survive." As days turned into weeks, the walls around Zuri grew tighter. She had become a ghost in the palace, avoiding the Alpha, avoiding anyone who could see the mark. Zuberi's absence left her feeling empty, like a piece of her soul had been torn away. And yet, the bond between them continued to pull at her, a thread that she couldn't break, no matter how hard she tried. Amina continued to parade around the palace, her position as the Luna secured with every passing day. She was adored, cherished, respected by the pack, while Zuri was left in the shadows. She was nothing but a servant, unseen, unheard. And yet there was that mark, that constant reminder that she was tied to the Alpha King, his mate, whether the pack would accept it or not. Zuri's back ached from hours of scrubbing the cold, gleaming marble tiles of the palace. The rhythmic motion of the sponge in her hand felt almost mechanical, a mindless task she repeated daily, a means of occupying her thoughts, if only for a moment. Amina had been granted control over her life, dictating what she could and couldn't do. Her place had been reduced to nothing more than serving the royals, running errands, and keeping her head low. But today, the weight of her thoughts felt heavier than ever. Her mind raced with the confusion of her bond with Zuberi and the emptiness that lingered after the morning's rumors. She could still feel his mark on her neck, despite the ointment she had used. Amina's words had echoed in her ears, and the tight grip of fear made it hard to breathe. Amina, with her venomous jealousy, would stop at nothing to destroy her, especially if she found out about the bond. And then she felt it. Amina's presence behind her. Zuri tensed, her spine straightening instinctively. The faint sound of footsteps told her that Amina had approached, not alone as usual, but flanked by palace guards. She knew what this meant. It wasn't an accidental encounter. This was another one of Amina's power moves, a public display of dominance over Zuri. Amina's shadow fell over her, and Zuri's breath caught in her throat. The power dynamics couldn't have been clearer. Amina, the Alpha's chosen mate, stood tall and commanding, while Zuri remained nothing but a lowly servant. The very sight of Amina, along with the guards flanking her, made Zuri feel like a trapped animal, her every movement under scrutiny. Amina, voice silky and cold, dripping with malice. So, the little servant still thinks she can hide, does she? Still scrubbing the floors like some common. Zuri's heart raced. Amina's presence was intimidating, but the thought of her possibly uncovering the mate bond made Zuri's stomach churn with dread. She had already felt the weight of the Alpha's claim. Amina had no idea yet, but the truth was bound to come out. Amina could not find out. She couldn't let the pack know about the mark that would expose her and Zuberi's forbidden bond. Zuri's hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to be clever, deceptive. She turned her face slightly, glaring up at Amina through the mop of hair hanging in front of her eyes, doing her best to appear humble and compliant. She sank further into the role of the obedient servant, hoping it would shield her from Amina's suspicion. Zuri, whispering, feigning submission. I beg you, my lady Amina, please don't. Don't hurt me. I know my place. I've done nothing to upset you, I swear. But the venom in Amina's eyes was unmistakable. Amina had always seen through Zuri's facade, and today was no different. Amina's lips curled into a sly smile. Zuri knew that look well. It was the one that came just before Amina made her move. Amina had always found new ways to humiliate Zuri, and today she was clearly seeking an advantage. Amina, mockingly leaning closer. Is that so? Well, you're in no position to beg, are you, Zuri? You know, everyone in the palace has been whispering. They say the Alpha has been unusually close to you. I'm wondering, do you have something to tell me? Zuri's stomach dropped. Her worst fear had come to fruition. Amina had suspected something. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the mark burning on her neck. Amina was too close, too dangerous. Zuri had to think fast. She forced a smile, masking her panic with a petty, exaggerated tone. Zuri, quickly, in a meek voice. I don't know what you mean, my lady. The Alpha and we've never had anything. I've been faithful to my duties, and he is a king, and I'm just a lowly servant. She threw her head down, trying to appear humble, desperately hoping the conversation would shift. But Amina wasn't so easily fooled. Her gaze sharpened, narrowing with suspicion. Amina, sneering. Really? So, you're telling me there is nothing between you? You're just a humble servant, doing what you're told, and he's been paying you special attention for no reason? The words were like daggers, sharp and dangerous. Zuri had to act quickly. Zuri stammered, shaking her head frantically as she cast a glance toward the guards. They were watching her closely. If they suspected anything, the Alpha's bond would be revealed, and her life would be forfeit. Zuri, with dramatic humility, almost pleading, "I swear, Lady Amina, there's nothing. I don't deserve his attention. It's not what you think. If you hear anything, it's just rumors. The Alpha, the king, he's a noble man. He would never look at someone like me. I've been helping him with his health, that's all. I haven't done anything wrong." Her voice cracked with desperation, the tension so thick she could barely breathe. But Amina wasn't done. She leaned in closer, mocking Zuri's helplessness. "Amina," her voice icy, low. "You're a fool if you think you can fool me. If you even think of playing smart with me, I will make sure you're thrown to the wolves. You, a mere servant, trying to claim what's mine." She stepped back, sneering at Zuri with all the arrogance and pride she could muster. Amina, with finality, coldly. "Let this be a warning, Zuri. I won't tolerate any more of your sly games. You belong to the Alpha and the Pack, but you will never have the place you dream of." With that, Amina turned, walking away with her guards flanking her, leaving Zuri to stare at her retreating figure. Zuri watched her go, her body shaking with both fear and sorrow. The bitter truth was clear. Amina had her claws deeply embedded in the Alpha's heart. Zuri had never stood a chance. The mate bond, the connection she felt toward Zuberi, was something Amina would never allow. Zuri stood there, alone in the palace corridor, as the reality of it all set in. Her fate had been sealed the moment she had become entangled with Zuberi. She wept silently, feeling the weight of the necklace on her neck, a constant reminder of the love she could never have. Later at night, Zuri locked herself in her bedchamber. She could still feel the weight of Amina's words. But something else was stirring inside her, a fire she hadn't recognized before, one that grew stronger with every passing moment. The mate bond tugged at her once more. She couldn't deny it. She didn't want to face it. She didn't want to admit that Zuberi was the one she loved, but the pull between them was undeniable. And yet, Amina's warnings echoed in her ears. Zuri, whispering to herself, "If I don't hide the bond, it will be the end of me." With her heart pounding in her chest, Zuri slipped out of the palace quarters, careful not to make a sound. The night was still, the palace cloaked in a thick silence, but she could feel the tension in the air. Amina's eyes were ever watchful, and Khalid's shadow seemed to hang over every corner of the palace. Zuri had to move fast. She had to get out before anyone could stop her. Her feet barely made a sound on the stone floors as she crept down the long, narrow hallway, the heavy weight of fear clutching at her throat. The air smelled of fresh earth and the scent of flowers in bloom, faintly comforting, but the adrenaline in her veins was enough to make her heart race. Her only destination was the gates to freedom. She knew the woods well. She could disappear into them, become one with the wilderness, at least long enough to escape the pack's eyes. The freedom she had craved for years was almost within her reach, and she could almost taste it. Fresh air, new beginnings, a life without the chains of the pack. But as she rounded a corner toward the gates, a flicker of motion caught her eye. 2 guards appeared in the distance, eyes scanning the palace grounds. She froze, heart thumping violently against her ribs, her breath shallow. Amina's spies had found her, and the hunt had begun. Zuri's pulse raced as she darted into a nearby alleyway. The shadows swallowed her as she moved, but she knew she couldn't outrun them forever. Amina's plan had been set in motion. The Luna had been watching her, and she had orchestrated the entire escape, only to catch Zuri at the most critical moment. As Zuri moved farther into the shadows, the 2 guards took notice. They moved quickly, silently, blocking every possible route she could take. It was Amina's doing. She had planted the guards, making sure they would catch Zuri trying to escape. The Alpha's mate had already anticipated this moment, and as Zuri sprinted into the courtyard, hoping for one last chance to reach the gates, she was cornered. Amina, standing with Khalid at the far end of the palace yard, appeared, a satisfied grin stretching across her face. Amina, coldly, with venom dripping from her voice. "Did you really think you could run, Zuri? That you could escape your fate? You belong to the pack, whether you want to or not." Zuri's chest tightened, the dread sinking in as her body grew weary from the chase. She was trapped. She could hear the guards' heavy footsteps closing in on her. There was nowhere left to run. Zuri, breathing heavily, struggling to keep her composure. I had to. I had no choice, my lady Amina. Please, let me go." Amina, mocking her with a cruel smile. "No, Zuri. You never had a choice. The only choice you had was whether you'd obey or suffer. But don't worry. The pack will make sure your actions have consequences." Before Zuri could say another word, the guards surrounded her, holding her tight. She fought back, but her strength was nothing compared to theirs. The pack had never been kind to those who disobeyed or dared to break the rules. And in the distance, Zuri could see Khalid. His eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The beta had been behind everything, orchestrating the entire plot. He was the one who had tipped off the guards, the one who had made sure Zuri would be caught. As the guards bound her hands, Zuri's heart sunk. Her escape had been futile. She had been used, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Zuri was thrown to her knees before Amina. The elders would soon arrive, and the pack would decide her fate. The gossip was already spreading like wildfire through the palace. Amina, sneering, her voice cold and victorious. "The pack's judgment will be swift, Zuri. You tried to flee, to betray us. You're not worthy of the Alpha's favor. The gods will decide your fate, and I will see to it that you pay for your insolence." The elders were gathering by morning light, and with them came the murmurs of judgment. Zuri's heart raced with fear and regret. She had run to escape the life the Alpha King had given her, but in doing so, she had sealed her doom. As she knelt before the pack, a sense of hopelessness filled her. The gods would decide her fate, but it seemed that her destiny had already been decided for her. And in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder, would she ever be free from this bond? Or was it already too late? The elders were gathered, their faces grave. Zuri's fate was now in their hands. The words that followed would determine whether she would be cast aside, punished, or even sacrificed. Zuri's pulse quickened as she awaited her judgment, the weight of her mistakes and the consequences of her escape weighing heavily on her heart. Would the gods show mercy, or would they deliver their wrath? The tension in the air was palpable, and Zuri felt the eyes of the pack on her, judging, condemning. And then the elder spoke, his voice booming in the silence. Elder, with authority. "The gods will decide your fate, Zuri. Under pack law, if the elders decided she was guilty, her fate would be determined by the gods during a full moon ritual. Servants were seen as gifts from the gods, believed to hold the power to help the pack conquer lands, gain strength, and expand territories. The gods would ultimately decide her punishment during the ritual. Chapter 7. Under the cover of darkness, a lone, cloaked figure crept silently through the woods, the chill of the night air making the leaves rustle underfoot. He moved with purpose, carefully avoiding the light of the Alpha King's tent. There was a sense of urgency in his step, his heart racing, not from fear, but from the gravity of the news he carried. He approached the tent cautiously, his form barely visible under the dark cloak that concealed his identity. The Alpha King, who lay in deep thought, did not immediately notice the figure's arrival. But the figure had no time to waste. He pulled back the flap of the tent just enough to reveal himself to Zuberi, who was seated in a chair, his mind heavy with the burden of betrayal and uncertainty. The Alpha King was a man of control, yet tonight his emotions had already been stretched thin. The cloaked figure stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a mix of caution and respect as he addressed the king. Ankura, the cloaked figure, speaks softly but with urgency. "My king, the time for secrecy is over. The pack, the traitors amongst us have been revealed. The news is dire. They've conspired, and the strings have been pulled too close to home." Zuberi's expression was unreadable as he listened, but in the depths of his wolf's heart, a dangerous feeling clawed at him. His wolf wanted to act immediately, to strike down anyone who dared challenge his authority, to cleanse the pack of betrayal. The desire was raw, primal, but Zuberi understood the consequences of moving in anger. His wolf was too strong, too dangerous when pushed. Zuberi's grip tightened on the arm of his chair, but he remained still, forcing himself to listen. Ankura, Zuberi's mentee, knelt before the king. His posture was one of humility, but his eyes burned with fury as he watched the king struggle with the news. Ankura's voice was low, but filled with both wisdom and caution. Ankura, kneeling, his voice steady. "My king, I understand the anger that stirs in your chest, but you must exercise patience. Acting rashly could send the pack into a spiral from which we might never recover. Patience is your greatest weapon in this moment. We must pull the threads of this conspiracy carefully, one by one, or it will all unravel." Zuberi stood tall, and for a moment, there was a dangerous gleam in his eyes. The weight of the betrayal threatened to collapse him. His trusted people, those closest to him, were the ones who had used him like a puppet, leeching off his strength. He could feel it, the betrayal wrapping around him like a suffocating second skin. But the Alpha King knew better than to act purely on emotion. His control was his strength. He had earned his place as Alpha, and no matter how deep the betrayal, the power he wielded remained absolute. His words carried the weight of the pack, the authority of the gods themselves. Zuberi, with a controlled breath, his voice laced with cold authority. "I know what must be done. Patience, yes, but I will not be disrespected. My word is law. The pack will answer to me." His eyes flicked to Ankura, whose loyalty was without question. Ankura had been with him for years. Zuberi's voice hardened as he made his decision. Zuberi turned to Ankura, his eyes narrowing as he issued the command. "Send word to the Queen Mother. The pack's howling council must convene immediately. I will not allow this betrayal to continue unchecked. Tell them, the slave girl must be vindicated, either through divination or by my Alpha authority. This is my command, and no one will stand in the way of it." Ankura nodded, rising to his feet as he prepared to leave, his heart pounding with the responsibility of delivering such an imperative order. The Howling Council was the heart of the pack, the most sacred gathering in the Ribbon Pack. It was a meeting where ancient rituals and the will of the gods intersected, a place where the spiritual realm met the physical world. The council was composed of the priestess, the diviners, the lunar seer, and the blood shaman, all powerful figures who could communicate with the spirits, interpret the gods' will, and deliver justice to the pack. Zuberi's word was final, but it had to be backed by the gods. As the Alpha King's message spread through the pack, the Howling Council began its preparations. The lunar cycle was nearing its peak, and the full moon was approaching. This was no ordinary summons. The gods' involvement would be required to settle the growing unrest, especially concerning the mysterious actions of Zuri, the lowly servant who had become a source of unrest within the pack. Zuberi's word would be the law, but the spirits of the pack had to bear witness to it. Patience would be the key, and Ankura's loyalty would ensure Zuberi's decisions remained unchallenged. The night fell, and the pack warriors gathered as the moon rose high in the sky. Zuberi was already deep in his thoughts, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. The bond between him and Zuri would not be easy to break, nor would the pack's betrayal be easy to undo. As the Howling Council gathered in the sacred ground, Zuberi knew his final decision was coming. The elders would sit in judgment, but the outcome, whether Zuri would be vindicated or forced to face the consequences of her actions, would hinge on the gods' will. Would the gods show favor to the Alpha King? Would they give him the power to reclaim the pack's loyalty? Or would they allow the traitors to break the bond between him and Zuri? The time for action was near, and Zuberi had one chance to ensure that his pack, his legacy, remained intact. The rituals were about to begin, and the gods were listening. The Howling Council's judgment would be the turning point. Would the Alpha reign supreme, or would his kingdom fall to betrayal and treachery? In the sacred clearing of the pack's most ancient grounds, the air hummed with an energy that could only be felt by those who understood the old ways. The moon was at its fullest, casting an otherworldly glow across the gathering, and the Howling Council stood encircling the divine altar. At the heart of the council was the Oracle, an elder of immeasurable wisdom, her eyes clouded with foresight, able to see beyond the present. The priestess held a sacred bowl, its edges carved with symbols of the ancient spirits and the gods. From the bowl, a thick mist began to rise as she muttered ancient incantations, summoning the spirits to guide their judgment. The lunar seer, standing beside her, peered deeply into the night sky, her eyes flickering as if reading the constellations above. The blood shaman, with his blood-stained robes and mystical herbs, sprinkled offerings onto the fire, invoking the gods' favor. For Zuri, kneeling at the edge of the circle, the weight of this ritual was almost unbearable. She could hear the chants, the whispered prayers of the elders, but her heart was so heavy with fear and dread that she could hardly focus on their words. She could feel the gods' gaze upon her, and she wondered if this was her end or the beginning of something more. The oracle's voice rang out loud and clear, breaking the tense silence. The words she spoke were ancient, a powerful declaration, one that would forever shape Zuri's fate. The gods of the land have spoken. The wolf who defies pack laws and breaks sacred bonds is not beyond redemption. The gods have seen her heart. She has a greater purpose to fulfill, one that must unfold in the fullness of time. Let it be known, anyone who dares defy this divine verdict shall face the wrath of the gods, and their fate shall be sealed with darkness. The air shifted, and the fire blazed higher, casting shadows that flickered like spirits around the council members. The gods' blessing had been given, and with it, Zuri's life was spared. Amina's eyes narrowed in silent fury. She had been certain that the gods would sentence Zuri to death, ending her pathetic existence for good. But instead, Zuri had been pardoned, and Amina's fury burned hotter than ever. The pack had always been hers to rule alongside Zuberi, but now a servant girl had been spared, and Amina would not stand for it. Amina, gritting her teeth, whispering to herself, "This isn't over, Zuri. You won't be free for long." Back in her quarters, Zuri sat on her bed, her heart still pounding with the echoes of the judgment. The words of the oracle rang in her ears, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. The gods had pardoned her. Her life was spared. Zuri couldn't believe it. She had been so certain that her fate was sealed, that Amina's desires for her to be punished would win out. But the gods had seen something in her, and she had been given another chance. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she sat in the dimly lit room, the relief flooding through her in waves. She had been given a life, a future. Freedom, though still uncertain, was now an option. But even as she sat there, a new fear stirred inside her. How had this happened? Had Zuberi influenced the gods to have them intervene on her behalf? The Alpha King had been absent. Zuri couldn't explain it, but she knew there was no doubt that Zuberi's power had played a role. But what did it mean for her now? Could she live with the pack without facing their wrath? Would she have the freedom to live her life, or would Amina come for her again? Despite the relief that surged through her, Zuri couldn't escape the weight of the mate bond. She had been marked, claimed by Zuberi, and nothing could change that. She stood at the window, gazing out at the full moon rising above the packlands. She had never imagined that love, true love, could be so complicated. Zuri, to herself, quietly, I was never meant to be his. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve him. But the mate bond pulsed stronger within her, and deep down, she knew it was unavoidable. She belonged to him, and there was no escaping it. As Zuri lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder. What now? The gods had spared her, but that didn't mean her life would be easy. She still had to face Amina, still had to face the pack's judgment, and the Alpha King had yet to make his move. Would Zuberi help her? Or would the bond remain a curse, keeping her chained to the fate that had been sealed from the beginning? Chapter 8. The war ended in victory. Zuberi's name would be etched into the annals of the pack's history as the conqueror. With his fierce warriors by his side, he had crushed rival packs, acquired new territories, and taken countless hostile packs as servants and subjects. The spoils of the war were immense, and Zuberi had expanded his pack's domain more than ever before. Khalid, ever by his side, had ensured that the mission was executed flawlessly, and the Alpha King couldn't help but appreciate his loyalty to the pack, though not loyal to him. After the brutal campaign, Zuberi's body was exhausted, his mind weary, but his heart, his wolf, burned with the fire of conquest. The land had been secured, but his personal battle, with Zuri, with the mate bond, still raged within him. He had ignored it, pushed it to the back of his mind, but as he neared the palace, it crept back to the forefront of his thoughts. As Zuberi entered the palace gates, the first face he saw was Amina's. The Luna had been waiting for him, a vision of grace and poise as she stood at the entrance to greet her victorious mate. Her gaze was fixed with a confident, almost calculating smile, her posture regal as she awaited the return of the man who had brought her the title she longed for. Amina, with a deep dramatic bow, her voice dripping with honey. "My king, welcome home. Your triumph is the glory of our pack. The strength of your leadership will never be questioned again." Her words were rich with respect, but layered with a hidden agenda, actively playing the part of the perfect Luna, offering him comfort and praise, all while subtly solidifying her position by his side. Yet, despite the grand greeting, her mind was far from at ease. Zuri's presence was still an unsettling thorn in her side. Now that Zuberi had returned, Amina knew it was time to push her plans forward, to eliminate the servant girl once and for all. Zuberi's tired eyes met Amina's, but his mind remained elsewhere. The victory he had earned, the expansion of their lands, the wealth, none of it mattered as much as the feeling gnawing at him. It was Zuri, Zuri's absence, her distance that haunted him. The bond between them, though unspoken, had been complicated and strong, but now it felt fractured. It was as if a ripple had gone through their connection, a disturbance he couldn't quite place. He shook off the thought and turned toward his chambers, his body aching with the weight of the war and the physical toll it had taken on him. As he passed through the palace halls, his wolf stirred in unease. It sensed something. Something was wrong. His bond with Zuri, though ever present, was not the same. The tug in his chest was more like a fracture, a wound, as if the connection had been strained. Zuberi didn't know what it meant yet. Zuberi, thinking to himself, voice soft with regret. I shouldn't have left her alone. Zuberi sat in the dimly lit chamber, his mind preoccupied with the duties of the day. His body was still tired from the long journey and the stresses of leadership, but his mind, his heart, was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His wolf had been restless, stirring within him, feeling the distance between him and Zuri. When he had asked for Zuri to attend him, he hadn't expected much, just the usual service. But when she walked in, something was different. Her presence, usually warm and comforting, now seemed empty. She entered quietly, accompanied by other attendants, each of them moving like shadows around her. Zuberi's eyes fell on her instantly. This was a shadow of her. Quiet, obedient, almost zombie-like. An evidence of Amina and Khalid's undoing. Zuberi felt a pang in his chest, a deep ache of confusion and regret. His wolf stirred again, more urgently now, sensing something it couldn't fully understand. This wasn't right. Zuri moved toward him with practiced grace, bowing respectfully as she entered, her hand steady as she arranged his personal items. But her demeanor was unlike anything Zuberi had ever witnessed. She was no longer the confident, bold woman he had come to know. Now, she seemed like a shell, an automaton performing her duty with no spark of life, and it hit him like a blow. He had hurt her. Somewhere along the way, he had broken her, and the consequences of his actions were now painfully clear. Zuberi opened his mouth to speak, to reach out, to demand answers, but his words faltered as he noticed the other attendants standing nearby. It wasn't the right time. His wolf growled inside him, sensing the fractured bond, a wounded connection that felt off, like a damaged tether between them. Zuri's presence was there, but it wasn't the same. The bond he had once felt so strongly, now felt fragile, strained, as though she was pulling away from him. Zuberi's chest tightened. He had become too focused on everything else, duty, the pack, the war, and had ignored the one thing that mattered most. Zuri. He had kept his distance, had let her slip away in ways he couldn't explain. Now, he realized just how much damage had been done, but he couldn't confront her in front of the others. Not now. Not with her so subdued, so distant. Zuberi gritted his teeth, frustrated with himself. He needed answers. He needed to know what had happened, but it would have to wait. Zuberi, muttering to himself, his voice low, I should have never left you like this. I should have never. The pain of his words hit him with the force of a punch. The guilt was overwhelming. Zuri had been the one thing that had given him peace in the chaos, the one thing he had wanted to hold on to. But now, she seemed lost to him. He stood abruptly, the heat of his frustration making him feel trapped, like he couldn't move fast enough to fix what he had broken. But the truth was, he didn't know how to fix it, not yet. Zuberi, turning to the attendants, his voice sharp, Leave us. The attendants bowed and exited the room, leaving him alone with Zuri. For a long moment, Zuberi just stared at her, helpless. He wanted to reach out, to pull her back to him, but he couldn't. He had to fix this carefully, not rashly. He had to heal the fractured bond, but that would take time. Dante howled in frustration inside him, pushing against the walls of his chest. Zuberi, with a deep breath, more to himself than to her, I'll make this right, Zuri. I'll fix this. Amina will never cause you any trouble again. I will see to it." Zuri responded very dryly. How? How do you plan on doing that, Your Highness?" He was about to explain to her that he never chose Amina, nor intended to marry her. It's all just a... Without waiting for his response, she fled the room and vowed he would never see her tears. Not one drop. As the night grew deeper and the palace quieted, Zuberi knew he had to find Zuri alone. He had to explain what had happened, understand why she was so distant, and why their bond had become so fragile. Didn't she have any faith in him? But this time, he would approach her differently. He would make sure there was no one to interrupt, no one to see the vulnerable man behind the alpha. No more distance between them. No more confusion. He would face the consequences of his neglect, of his mistakes, but he would not lose her. Not like this. Zuberi's wolf settled slightly, sensing his resolve. He moved toward the door, determined to seek Zuri out on his own terms, to try and heal what had been broken. The air was heavy with tension as he approached the door. He raised his hand, his knuckles poised to knock, but then his breath caught in his throat. There was no response, no sound from within. He hesitated, feeling the weight of the silence press against him. His heart thundered in his chest as he pushed the door open, stepping forward, only to be met with the sudden force of a strong hand pulling him back into the shadows. The movement was quick, deliberate, and Zuberi barely had time to react. His back collided with the cool stone wall of the hallway, his pulse racing as the figure behind him pressed him into the corner. Ankura, the young warrior and Zuberi's mentee, stood in front of him, his eyes narrowed, his voice barely a whisper. "Ankura, urgent. Low. Stay back, my king. Do not go inside just yet." Zuberi raised an eyebrow, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. He gestured with his hand, silently asking, "Why?" Before Ankura could respond, Maiko and Zuri appeared at the door, just as Zuberi felt an inexplicable tension surge through his chest. They had stopped in the hallway, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. Zuri, her posture tense, was clinging tightly to Maiko, her face buried in the older woman's shoulder. Zuri, her voice trembling, desperate. "I will find a way to speak to him. Alone. I have to break the bond. I can't live with it. I can't." "Zuri, listen to me. Understand. But you have to think this through. The Alpha King is not just any man. You have to trust that this bond was made for a reason. Don't you feel it? The pull of your wolf? You've always known the mate bond was a force you couldn't fight. Please, don't be too hasty." Zuri looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to run away from everything, but Maiko's gentle touch calmed her slightly. Still, the churning in her chest didn't ease. Zuberi's heart shattered as he watched them disappear into the bedchamber. Her words pierced him like a blade to the chest. But it wasn't just the rejection that hurt. It was the pain in her voice, the fear and desperation that screamed louder than everything she had said. He had never felt so powerless, so utterly helpless. The one person he had ever truly desired, the one person who held his heart, was now turning away from him. His wolf stirred in the pit of his stomach, sensing the change in their bond. His wolf didn't understand. It only roared in anger and frustration. It wanted to pull her back, to force her to acknowledge what was between them, but he couldn't. Zuri's decision was hers to make. He thought he had time, but now, as he stood there, watching her attempt to escape the bond, he realized that time was no longer on his side. For the first time in his life, Zuberi was scared. He had always been the alpha, the one in control, the one who had the pack's loyalty and strength behind him. But here, in this moment, with Zuri, he felt like he was losing everything. The thought of her wanting to break the bond, of her asking to be free, terrified him. Zuberi, gritting his teeth, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll never let you go. You will never get that chance to reject me." He had made up his mind. He would never accept her rejection. He wouldn't allow it. Chapter 9. Chaos had erupted once again within the palace walls. The king lay in his chamber, his body writhing in delirium, and his mind barely hanging on to consciousness. The curse, that ancient curse which had plagued the Alpha King's bloodline for centuries, had reached its peak. It was no longer just a malady of the body. It had become an all-consuming force, a vicious beast clawing its way into his very soul. The healers had tried everything: potions, concoctions, herbs, and elixirs. They had failed at every turn. The king's body, once invincible, now felt like it was crumbling under the weight of a curse that seemed determined to annihilate him. He teetered on the brink of a coma, a condition that was said to be irreversible for werewolves. A wolf in coma was believed to be journeying toward the spirit world, a journey from which there was no return. Inside the royal chamber, the king's breath was shallow, his skin cold and damp, and his eyes glazed, lost in fevered visions. Amina stood by, her face etched with impatience and frustration, shouting at the healers for failing to cure him. Her voice echoed throughout the room as she berated them for their incompetence. Amina, with a sharp, cutting tone, "Do something. This is unacceptable. My mate, the Alpha King, will not die on your watch. He's not dead yet. You are to cure him now." The healers scrambled, their hands shaking as they rushed to prepare more brews and salves. But their nervous glances told the true story. The king's condition was worsening, and they were running out of options. In the distance, the elders gathered, whispering in quiet reverence, preparing themselves for the worst. They had seen many things, but the curse reaching such a height was unprecedented. Their whispered prayers to the spirits of the ancestors grew more fervent with every passing minute. Meanwhile, Khalid, standing near the door, couldn't hide the faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. His left hand remained firmly tucked inside his kembe, but his eyes, cold and calculating, revealed his true thoughts. The Alpha King's suffering was exactly what he had planned. The weaker Zuberi grew, the more control Khalid would have over the pack's future. He couldn't help but revel in the power he was about to seize. The pack's howling council was invoking every spiritual tool at their disposal, hoping for a divine intervention. But they were completely unaware that the real source of Zuberi's affliction lay not in the spirits, but in Khalid's hands. He had secretly consulted with rogue Orgbanje spirits, dark entities who roamed the wilds beyond the pack's borders. They had promised him power to weaken the Alpha, power to siphon his life for an exchange. The magic he had used was forbidden, a sickening, vile ritual that involved crafting an effigy, a representation of the Alpha's spirit from the woolen culture of a stillborn. The ritual was not only dark but unspeakable, and the power it granted him was unfathomable. With each passing moment, Khalid was squeezing the life out of Zuberi, silently, slowly, ensuring that the Alpha King would not survive this. And the best part? No one knew. The magic Khalid wielded was so insidious, so deeply hidden beneath layers of mysticism and ritual, that the elders would never suspect him. He had set his plan into motion and was enjoying every second of it. As the night wore on and the king's delirium deepened, Khalid excused himself from the room, his face masked in beads of sweat, though they were born more from feigned concern than actual distress. He made his way through the palace halls, his movements quick and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Khalid muttering to himself, "I can finally silence him. The pack will be mine. All it took was a little patience. And now, Zuberi's time is up. He stepped out into the beautiful lawn of the palace outer courts, the cool night air washing over him. He paused, standing in the center of the open space, allowing the freedom to settle in. He had done what was needed to ensure Zuberi's downfall, and now, the Alpha King was nothing more than a pawn in Khalid's grand scheme. With his hand still tucked in his kembe, Khalid allowed himself a wicked smile, watching the moonlight dance across the grounds. His heart was satisfied, knowing he had taken control of the pack's destiny. No more would he be overshadowed by the Alpha's power. Zuberi's reign was over. Zuri stood in the quiet of her chamber, the soft flicker of candlelight casting delicate shadows on the stone walls. She was alone, but not entirely. Her companion, Seal, was always with her, her wolf, her confidant, her friend. She spoke to Seal often in these moments of solitude, sometimes out loud, sometimes silently in her heart, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. Her heart swelled with a strange warmth whenever she communicated with Seal. It was the first time in her life that she had ever felt a true, unbreakable connection to something, someone other than herself. Seal was a gift born of her bond with the Alpha King, Zuberi. But what Zuri didn't fully understand was the magnitude of that connection. Seal was no ordinary wolf. She was tied not just to Zuri, but to Zuberi's spirit as well. The gods had bound her to Zuberi's wolf, Dante, creating a spiritual link that went beyond the realms of fate. Seal was not just Zuri's companion, she was a piece of the Alpha's soul. The moment was interrupted as a voice suddenly whispered in her mind, sharp and urgent, like a gentle command. Voice, Seal. To the Alpha's chamber now, Zuri. Go, now. Zuri froze, the voice sending an odd thrill through her veins. She had never heard Seal speak so clearly, so urgently. It felt like a command, pulling at her soul. Her heart began to pound. The Alpha's chamber was the last place she was permitted to be right now. The healers, the spiritualists, and the pack's experts were all in there, trying to keep him alive. But then the voice came again, softer but more insistent, now from within her chest. Voice, Seal. The curse is broken. You've already healed him, don't you feel it? Zuberi has become stronger, more vibrant ever since that night. Zuri's heart stopped. She stood there, stunned for a moment. Zuri, softly to herself. It's you. Seal. You're speaking. The wolf's presence inside her grew, more tangible than ever before. Seal, playfully, but with a touch of warmth. Of course, silly. Your mating with Zuberi broke the curse. The Alpha's wolf has grown stronger, and so have you. You didn't just get marked. You got me, your wolf, too. Zuri's heart fluttered. A rush of elation and gratitude filled her chest. It was a feeling she had always dreamed of, the wolf inside her, the one she had always yearned for. But that dream had been shattered by the constant emotional weight of her bond with Zuberi. A surge of excitement shot through Zuri as the realization of her newfound freedom consumed her. She had always wanted this, but now she felt an overpowering urge to let her wolf take control, to feel what it was like to run as one with the wild. Without thinking, Zuri stepped out of her chamber, her eyes scanning the palace grounds as she made her way to the open courtyard. The air was cool and crisp, the autumn breeze carrying with it the scent of fresh earth and crisp leaves. Her senses heightened instantly, like a new world opening up before her. Her body shifted, a subtle ripple of muscle and bone, and in that moment, Seal emerged. The wolf surged forward, and Zuri embraced it fully for the first time. She could feel the fury of the wolf inside her, the power, the speed, Her wolf, her companion, her friend. She felt alive. Seal darted across the grounds with a speed she had never known, her paws pounding against the earth, her senses on fire. Zuri's body responded with a grace and fluidity she had never felt before. The world blurred as she ran, faster than she had ever dreamed. Zuri's breath came in quick, exhilarated bursts as she raced through the palace gardens. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead of her, casting long shadows on the ground, and in those moments, she felt as if she were the only creature alive in the world. She ran, enjoying the freedom, the thrill of it all. The wind rushed through her fur, the scent of the open forest filling her senses. She leapt over fallen branches and sped past the palace walls. Zuri felt like she was finally, truly herself, wild and free. But then, she saw him. Khalid. He was walking across the courtyard, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. There was a sneer on his face, and Zuri's wolf growled low, sensing his malice. Zuri, in her mind, growling softly. No, not him. Keep going. But Seal wasn't in the mood for restraint. In a flash, the wolf darted towards him. She was lightning, a blur of fur and speed. Before Khalid could even react, Seal lunged at him, her teeth flashing as she grabbed onto his trousers, pulling him down to the ground. Khalid tumbled, his eyes wide with shock, as his clothing ripped in the chaos. The scene was absurd. Zuri's wolf had dismantled him in mere moments. The palace guards stood frozen, unsure whether to assist their beta or run after the thief who had caused the ruckus and made away with the beta's trouser. Some of the younger Omegas watched, laughing at the sight of their beta sprawled out in the dirt, half naked and humiliated. Seal raced into the forest, her paws pounding against the earth as she made her way to the sacred river. She reached the clearing, panting, and without hesitation, dropped Khalid's trousers into the flowing waters. Zuri felt a strange sense of exhilaration. The wolf had asserted herself, and it felt like the ultimate freedom. For the first time in her life, Zuri let go of her worries, surrendering to the joy of the moment. She was no longer afraid of the bond, of the uncertainty. She was one with Seal, and in this wild freedom, she could breathe. Zuri, gasping with excitement. Seal, we're free! We're alive! Seal, now calm and content, simply nudged Zuri with her nose, as if to say, "This is only the beginning, Zuri. There's so much more to discover." Zuri felt the pulse of the earth beneath her paws as she bounded through the dense forest, her body sleek and fluid, a living embodiment of freedom. The wind swept through the leaves above her, and the world around her seemed to vibrate with the energy of the wild. She had shifted into her wolf form fully, and for the first time in her life, she was free. Free from her chains, free from the expectations, the alpha and the pack's rigid laws. She had Seal, her wolf companion, her soulmate, and in these moments of pure exhilaration, there was nothing in the world but the earth beneath her paws and the freedom in her chest. Zuri, thinking to herself, exhilarated, breathless. I've never felt this alive, this free. No rules, no bonds, no responsibilities. It's just me. It's just us. She roamed the wilds, the forest, her playground. She sprinted, darting between towering trees, her sleek fur flowing in the wind. There was no destination, no purpose other than the pure joy of running. Her senses were alive. She could smell the earth and wildflowers. Her ears picked up the rustle of animals in the underbrush, the heartbeat of the forest itself. The sound of her paws hitting the earth was like a rhythm, like she and the world were one. The thrill surged through her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt powerful, untamed, free. As Zuri raced through the forest, her wolf instincts urged her onward, yet there was a tug within her, something that wasn't quite a thought, but more like an underlying ache, a pull that came from somewhere deep inside, like a distant whisper. It was the mate bond with Zuberi, and even in her wolf form she could feel it. The bond was still there, still strong, even if she had shifted and escaped into the wilds. Zuri, panting, her thoughts conflicting. I want this. I want to be free. But then, Zuberi. She slowed to a halt, standing still on the edge of a stream, the moonlight casting its glow on the water. Her breath came in heavy waves as she glanced at her reflection in the water, her wolf reflection. Seal's eyes stared back at her, bright and wild, but Zuri's heart felt heavy, tangled with emotions she couldn't escape. She knew what it meant to be free, to run wild, to leave behind everything that had ever held her down. But something else lingered. The mate bond, Zuberi's Dante's pull. The alpha's spirit was tied to hers in a way she couldn't explain. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how fast she went, she couldn't escape it. For a moment, Zuri stood motionless, gazing out into the wild. Her wolf's heart wanted to keep running, wanted to feel the rush of wind, the freedom of not being bound to anyone. She could choose this. She could go further into the wilds, seek a new pack, or become a rogue, free from the expectations of the pack, from the alpha. But a deeper part of her soul knew there was another pull, one that came from within her chest, a feeling that wasn't just about her, it was about him. Zuberi. The pull was there, not just in the mate bond, but in something she couldn't put into words. Dante's spirit, his wolf, had claimed her as much as she had claimed him. She was his, whether she liked it or not. Zuri, whispering to herself, confused. I want to be free. 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 She paced along the bank of the river, the moonlight shimmering on the water. She felt her wolf's presence as it was tethered to Dante, and that pull was hard to ignore. Yet, her mind screamed that she had a choice. She could keep running, keep the freedom she so desperately craved. She halted, her feet suddenly unsure of where to go. The moon cast its silvery light over the scene, and Zuri could almost feel Seal, her wolf, settling in her chest, as though she were waiting for Zuri to make a choice. Zuri let out a shaky breath, and as her wolf's spirit grew stronger within her, she realized one thing. She had two paths. She could remain a free wolf, wild and untamed, or she could return to Zuberi, to Amina, to the pack, to face the mate bond that had forever bound them, and live in agony as we watch him live his life with Amina, his chosen mate. Zuri closed her eyes, letting her wolf take over for just a moment. Seal's instincts surged through her, stronger than ever before. And in that moment, Zuri felt something new. Resolve. She couldn't run forever, could she? She had to face what was between them, the bond, the love, and the pain. The question was clear. Which path would she take? Would she seek freedom? Or would she embrace waiting in the shadows, maybe one day? Conclusion. 2 years later. The palace courts were filled with an air of excitement and celebration as preparations were made for the grand wedding of Zuberi, the Alpha King, and Amina, the noblewoman who had long been the favored match. Zuri stood quietly in the background, her eyes hidden beneath the veil of her duties as a servant, but her heart was far from the revelry around her. 2 years had passed since their separation, and the pain of her heart had been buried beneath a thick layer of resignation, but it never truly healed. She had returned to the pack, but never the back to the palace. After his recovery, the Alpha had resolved to fight for their love, though Zuri had already made her decision. She had tried to seek him out, to find private moments, to break the bond that connected them so deeply, but every attempt had been rejected. Zuri had sought out Ankura several times, hoping that the young man might be able to assist her in obtaining a private audience with the Alpha. She begged him to help her speak with Zuberi in a place where she might make her plea, to break the mate bond that had formed between them. But every time, Zuberi had refused to meet her, turning her away with cold indifference. She understood the message clearly: rejection. Zuri could no longer pretend that there was anything left to say between them. She had accepted the truth, no matter how much it crushed her soul. She knew that her fate was sealed, that her love for the Alpha would never be returned. And so, with a heavy heart, she disappeared into the shadows of the kingdom once more. She took on a life that publicly acknowledged her as a slave, blending into the background, fading into the palace halls like a ghost of the past. Her heart was broken, but she couldn't bring herself to defy the laws of the pack, the rules that said she was nothing, that she was just a lowly servant. Zuberi had never taken the risk to seek her out. He had a kingdom to rule, a status to uphold, and the mate bond didn't matter to him the way it did to her. He had chosen Amina, and Zuri had no place in his life. Days turned into months, and Q years. Zuri moved on with her life, accepting the harsh reality of her position. Despite the fleeting moments of hope that maybe, just maybe, Zuberi would come for her, she had learned to bury that hope deep within her. She began to form relationships with others, but none of them ever held the same intensity. None of them ever felt the way Zuberi had. None of them could love her the way he did, and she couldn't love anyone else in return. Her heart remained tethered to him, even though she knew it was a lost cause. The weight of the cultural divide, of the power dynamics between them, had crushed her belief in a future with him. She had accepted her life as a slave, as a woman who would never be allowed to rise above her station. Zuberi, the Alpha, had made his choice, and that choice had not been her. The Great Hall was alive with energy and grandeur, yet beneath the rich tapestries of the Alpha's victories, there was an undeniable tension. Zuri, in the midst of it all, felt like a mere shadow against the opulence surrounding her. As she moved through the crowd, serving at the wedding feast of Zuberi and Amina, a pang of sadness gripped her heart. She had been a part of this world once, of his world, but now she was nothing more than a servant, watching from the outside as her dreams shattered. Amina, beautiful and regal, was the center of attention. Her glamorous cornrows intricately braided with dyed sheep wool extensions, her hair a crown befitting her role. The nobles admired her, fawning over her with concealed jealousy. She clung possessively to Zuberi's arm, her smile radiating achievement and satisfaction, as if claiming the position she had long coveted. She was now the Luna Zuri kept her emotions in check, pushing them down behind a mask of calm professionalism. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she served the guests, but inside, her heart felt heavy. She kept her eyes downcast, avoiding the gaze of the nobles, and trying to avoid any lingering looks from Zuberi. Yet, despite herself, she noticed the small moments, the fleeting glances Zuberi sent her way. Was it pity? Was it longing? It was hard to tell, but Zuri's heart stirred each time their eyes met. Did he still care for her, even with Amina by his side? but the harsh reality of the situation crashed down on her, bringing the pain of their separation to the forefront. Zuri's life was so far removed from Zuberi's world now, so distant from his royal existence, that she could no longer pretend their connection meant anything more than passing glances, memories of a past that was now long gone. A few noblewomen glanced at Zuri, the slender, humble servant who served them their wine. Their eyes scanned her with disdain before looking away. She was nothing to them, a mere shadow in the backdrop of their luxurious lives. Her eyes remained down, and her hands moved with practiced precision as she served the guests. She had learned to fade into the background, to remain invisible. In contrast, the maids and other attendants bustled around the room, their silken uniforms now looking frayed with exhaustion. Their faces were drawn, eyes flickering with impatience, as they catered to every whim and demand of the nobles. Perfumed candles flickered on the long banquet tables, and every guest seemed to have their own personal servant, the maids attending to every motion, every gesture. There was no room for mistakes in the great hall, and the servants, from the youngest maid to the more experienced attendants, worked like automatons, their faces blank and their movements sharp and precise. Each one was a cog in the massive machine of the palace, spinning endlessly to ensure the noble guest's pleasure was met without hesitation. Overworked and underappreciated, they moved with quiet efficiency, but their eyes told the story of the weight they carried, always observing the luxurious world they could never touch. But there was something else, a shift in the air, a sense that change was coming. Zuri had noticed it in the past year, the subtle shifts in the pack's hierarchy. There were whispers of new alliances, loyalty tests, and positions being reassigned. The noble guests seemed to be more attentive to the Alpha King's decisions, and there was a palpable undercurrent of tension in the palace. The noblewomen gossiped about the marriage, about how the Alpha King had finally chosen his Luna, and how Zuri, the servant girl, had no place in his world anymore. She had no place at Zuberi's side, and that was a hard pill to swallow. But it was the truth. Amina was the one who belonged with him now. Zuri was just a ghost of the past, a mere servant, relegated to the shadows of his world. More than that, Zuri could feel the eyes on her. The nobles who once ignored her now glanced at her with curiosity or judgment, as if they were seeing her for the first time. But she had no power to defend herself. Her duty was to serve. And for now, that was all she could do. As the night wore on and the festivities drew to a close, Zuri found herself alone, her thoughts lost in the chaos of emotions she couldn't untangle. The wedding stands as a reminder of everything she could never have. Zuberi's love, his presence, his future. Zuri stood by the window of the banquet hall, watching the guests as they continued to mingle and laugh, their faces full of joy, their lives full of the privileges she would never know. Her thoughts flickered back to the small moments, the times when Zuberi had looked at her with warmth, when his hand had brushed against hers, and when his eyes had seemed to speak of a deeper connection. But now, there was only Amina by his side, and Zuri was left to serve the very people who mocked her in silence. Zuri didn't know where her place was anymore. But what was left for her? She had lost herself in the process of loving him, and now, with Amina by his side, Zuri had to find a way to move on, even though her heart still clung to him. What was her place now? What could she do? Zuri closed her eyes for a moment, and as the weight of the Alpha's choice pressed down on her chest, she realized something crucial. Her fate had already been sealed. There was no turning back. She was no longer the Alpha's mate, and in a way, she had never truly been his. The only question left now was, could she ever escape the bonds of her past and start anew? Or was she forever bound to a life of loneliness, pain, and unrequited love. Zuri walked through the palace corridors, the grandeur of the wedding ceremony still fresh in the air. The marble floors beneath her feet echoed with each step, but there was a certain weight that had settled in her chest, an oppressive feeling that she couldn't quite shake. It wasn't just the bustling sounds of servants preparing for the aftermath of the grand event. It was the strange sensation that someone was watching her. At first, she thought it was just the loneliness creeping in, but then the feeling grew stronger. Her instincts, now heightened by the wolf's presence, told her that she wasn't alone. Slowly, she lifted her head, and her gaze traveled across the courtyard. And there, in the deep shadows of the stone arches, stood Zuberi. He was unmistakable, even from a distance. His posture was commanding, his figure cut against the backdrop of the moonlit night. He was watching her. Her breath caught in her throat as their eyes locked. Time seemed to stretch, the world around her fading until only the intensity of his gaze remained. His eyes, dark and piercing, held her captive. There was no doubt. He had been watching her, but now it was different. This time he didn't look away. The way his gaze held hers made her heart skip a beat, a silent understanding passing between them. For a moment, it was as if everything else faded. The crowd, the ceremony, even Amina's presence seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. Zuri could feel the tension between them, the longing and the unspoken desire that hung thick in the air. Her heart raced as she tried to decipher the emotions playing out on his face. His smirked, eyes hooded beneath strong eyelids, seemed satisfied, but not in a cruel way. It was as if everything that had happened, every decision, every turn of fate, had led them to this moment. Zuri's chest tightened, a wave of emotions rushing over her that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Confusion mingled with dread, love tangled with resentment. But before she could process it all, Zuberi's expression shifted. That smirk slowly faded, replaced by something more intense, something deeper. Passion, desire. She could see it in the way he looked at her, his eyes filled with hidden longing, emotions he had kept buried for so long. The rawness of it all shocked her, made her heart ache. But it didn't last long. In an instant, Zuberi turned away, his figure fading into the distance as he walked back toward his new bride. Amina stood behind him, a satisfied, contented smile on her face. As if on cue, she twirled into his arms, the picture of a queen finally claiming what she believed was hers. Zuri's heart sank. The smirk Zuberi had given her, the moment of connection, felt like a cruel joke now. Amina's presence, her satisfaction, felt like a final slap in the face. Zuri's chest tightened with a mixture of anger, hurt, and betrayal. Her eyes narrowed, her delicate features hardening into an ugly scowl as she watched them. The sting of seeing Zuberi so intimately with Amina made her blood boil, even as her heart broke. She was nothing. Her place in his life was nothing more than a memory, a fleeting ghost of a love that never had a chance. And with every step Zuberi took, walking away with Amina, it was like he was leaving her behind for good. Zuri turned sharply, unable to watch any longer. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions, but in the end, she knew the truth. She could never be his. Not now. Not ever. The question lingered in the air like a poison. Had she ever really been his? Or had it all just been a dream that was now shattered by the cold reality of his life, his marriage, and his future? Quietly, 3 years had passed since Zuri's painful exit from Zuberi. The grand royal palace again buzzed with activity, filled with nobility, servants, and guests from neighboring packs, all gathered for the wedding of Zuberi's cousin, Ashishi, to an alpha noble from an allied pack. The event marked not only a union of two powerful families, but also the passage of 3 years since Zuri's separation from Zuberi. The kingdom had settled back into a new rhythm, with shifts in the political landscape, amendments to pack laws, and changes in the power structure. Zuri, still a lowly servant, remained at the palace, keeping her distance from the festivities. She had convinced herself she had moved on, but deep inside, her heart was still bound to Zuberi, though she knew there was no chance for them. Zuberi, now the alpha in every sense, led the wedding ceremony with a sense of duty and authority. His public demeanor was one of strength, but beneath it, memories of Zuri's love and the bond they had shared still haunted him. For 3 years, he had buried his feelings, but every glance at Zuri stirred a desire he couldn't suppress. Zuberi had not once given Zuri the chance to speak to him privately, to express her rejection, or ask him to break their mate bond. He had made sure of that. Every decision, every move he had made in the past 3 years had been designed to keep her at arm's length, despite the aching pain and guilt that gnawed at his heart. The separation had been necessary, or so he had convinced himself. Yet deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing her, and the burden of that knowledge weighed heavily on him. Zuri remained unaware of Zuberi's watchful eye. From afar, he had kept a close watch on her, an invisible presence in her life, making sure she was safe, yet never allowing himself to be seen. His love for her never wavered, even as the world around him shifted and changed. Every political move he had made, every restructure of the kingdom, every marriage arranged, and every power struggle engineered had been done with one goal in mind: to bring them back together. Even now, as he sat amidst the nobility, overseeing the wedding and Amina's place as his Luna, Zuberi's heart remained tethered to Zuri. Every decision, every action had been designed to tear down the walls between them and bring her back into his life. He had manipulated the power structures, fueling suspicion around Amina, all while holding on to the hope that one day Zuri would return to him, that the bond they shared would finally bring them together again. But for now, he could only watch from afar, silently suffering as she moved through life, unaware of his constant presence. Amina, now the Alpha's wife, stood proudly beside Zuberi, respected, honored, and seen as the ideal mate, intelligent, powerful, and deeply aligned with the Alpha's spirit. She appeared to be everything a Luna should be. Yet beneath her composed, regal exterior, something far more dangerous brewed within her. The public facade of contentment in her marriage was a mask, one that barely held up against the constant gnawing knowledge of the truth. Zuberi's heart was not hers. Zuri still haunted him. The way Zuberi avoided her touch, refused to mark her, and kept his distance was a painful reminder of the bond he shared with the woman who had been forced to disappear from his life. Despite her best efforts to fulfill her role as his Luna, Amina knew, deep down, that Zuri was still the woman Zuberi loved, and it made her stomach turn with resentment. Zuri's absence wasn't the only threat to her position. Amina's jealousy festered as Zuberi continued to withhold himself from her. He refused to consummate their marriage, despite her persistent, even desperate attempts to draw him close. Amina wasn't a fool. Zuberi's lingering feelings for Zuri were clear, and the weight of it felt like a dagger to her heart, twisting deeper with every day. She had worked so hard to secure her place as Luna, but Zuberi's heart was still a puzzle she couldn't solve. And though the pack continued to praise her, deep down, she knew her marriage was far from complete. Amina's struggles weren't just confined to Zuberi's feelings for Zuri. A more immediate threat had emerged with Khalid, the former beta, who had been exposed as a traitor and sentenced for his betrayal. Zuberi's cold ruthlessness in dealing with Khalid sent chills through Amina's spine. She had never seen him like that before. The alpha she thought she knew had turned into something unrecognizable. He handled Khalid's arrest and sentencing with clinical precision, mercilessly clamping down on every escape route until there was no chance left for Khalid to squirm. Amina watched as Khalid was decapitated, his life snuffed out in an instant. It was a masterpiece of execution, a spectacle of power that left even the most loyal warriors of the pack silent. No one dared question Zuberi, for his command was final. But Amina, watching it unfold, felt a chill run through her. She knew the depths of his ruthlessness, but this was different. This was personal. The man she had married, the one she thought she knew so well, had transformed before her eyes. His love for Zuri had already made her question everything, but now, with Khalid's death, she began to wonder if she had ever truly understood the man she was bound to. Was this the alpha she had admired, the one she had trusted, or had she merely been a pawn in his game all along? Some mysteries would forever remain unsolved, like the strange illness that nearly took the alpha's life, how it appeared so suddenly and vanished just as quickly. No one could explain the mysterious wolf that attacked Khalid, nor why it fled into the forest with his trousers. The irony of it all lingered, unanswered. Amina stood before the mirror later that night, her fingers lightly touching her throat, as if searching for the words that might explain the gnawing emptiness inside. Zuberi's love had never been hers to claim entirely. She had thought marriage would seal the deal, that Luna would be enough to claim his heart. But now, she wasn't so sure. As the Luna, she had the respect of the pack, the praise of the council, and the reverence of the pack members. But was that enough? Was it enough to silence the whispers of a future that felt more and more like a prison? What was her future with Zuberi now? She could see the writing on the wall. His heart was still with Zuri, and her place as his mate had always been more about duty than love. The weight of her own feelings began to suffocate her as she still and quiet in the solitude of her chambers. She had achieved everything she had worked so hard for, and yet Zuri's shadow lingered. It was an undeniable truth that Amina couldn't escape. Zuberi's heart belonged to Zuri. But still, she fought on, unwilling to surrender. Her pride was too great, and she would not allow herself to be overthrown, not without a fight. The palace was alive with the sounds of celebration, but beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Zuberi, now fully in control, had made a bold move. He had instated Akura, a young warrior personally mentored by him, as the new beta. Akura was more loyal, more committed to maintaining order within the pack, and Zuberi's decision had rippled through the pack, bringing about further changes to the laws that governed marriage and the status of slaves. As the wedding festivities unfolded, Zuberi stood at a distance, his gaze fixed on Zuri. There was longing in his eyes, regret for the time lost, for the separation he had forced upon them. Despite his efforts, despite the kingdom's shifting laws, he had never truly let go of her. For 3 years, he had worked in silence, making strategic moves to strengthen his rule. And now, as the festivities celebrated his marriage to Amina, the final pieces of his plan were falling into place. As Zuberi continued to watch Zuri, his beta, Akura, approached with grave news. Investigation into Amina's activities had uncovered shocking evidence of her manipulation and betrayal. It seemed Amina had been scheming to solidify her own power and political ambitions, using Zuberi as a pawn. Akura's words were quiet, but Zuberi's expression remained unwavering. Without shifting his gaze from Zuri, Zuberi nodded silently, taking in the weight of this new information. Amina's treachery had been brewing for longer than he'd realized, and the time had come for him to act. Zuberi's gaze never left Zuri. This time, he didn't look away, didn't turn his back, as he had in the past. He had been watching her from afar for so long, but now things had changed. The final part of his plan was set in motion, and Amina's betrayal and Khalid's downfall had set the stage for his ultimate move. Zuberi's power was now secure. He had outmaneuvered his enemies, and the time had finally come to claim Zuri. A satisfied smirk crossed his face, but there was no triumph in his expression, only determination. The moment had arrived, and there was no turning back. He had secured the kingdom. He had clamped down on Amina's powers, and now the last piece of his plan remained. Zuri. Would she accept him now? Would the divorce between him and Amina be peaceful, or would it escalate into a full-blown political battle? And most importantly, would the newly revised laws regarding marriage and slavery be enough to give Zuri the freedom she deserved, and the love they both longed for? Zuberi's mind raced with the possibilities, and as his smirk remained, the final question hung in the air. Would their love finally blossom, or would it wither under the weight of their responsibilities and the pack's expectations? The final move had been made. The stakes were set. The only question left was whether Zuri would take his hand or walk away from him forever. Did you enjoy the story? If you're captivated by the world of Zuberi, Zuri, and the fascinating creatures that inhabit this universe, there's so much more to explore. From mythical beings to powerful pack dynamics, the journey is just beginning. If you'd like to know more about Kioni's world and its fictional creatures, please subscribe to my channel to stay updated. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story and discuss the plot with you. Feel free to share the link with your friends and debate the twists and turns of the tale. More exciting adventures are on the way, so stay tuned. Thank you for your support.